everybody. Happy Friday. Welcome to the tip-off, the show that sets the stage for all the most important news, daily fantasy plays, and bets on tonight's 11-game NBA slate. We have a lot to cover here. I am your host, Kayla Knierim. Joining me once again today, we've got Chris Spags and Ben Rasa. Ben sans glasses.
Yeah, had to change it up Friday. It's really hot in New York, first time in a long time. It's really windy too, but yeah, it's almost 80 here. Really surprising. Didn't expect that when I woke up.
That's more than LA.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, I'm wearing a leather jacket because I'm cold and it was in my closet. And I thought, hey, why not look like an edgy 80s comedian today for this show? And I'm excited to be here. I'm a little bit overwhelmed by Ben breaking out the steely glare here. The magnum probably going to come out of those eyes at any moment. But excited for this big slate, short show today, but we have a lot to hit on. So can't wait to ramble incoherently for the next 45 minutes.
Spags, I'm sad I didn't see that jacket before we got on because I would have put mine on too and we could have been twins. Oh, well.
That is one of our things. We're basically like the Wonder Twins. We just dress up the same way every day and try to make it work for a show.
A missed opportunity. Maybe we'll do it next week. All right. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for countless hours of content on the NBA, NHL, PGA, MMA, NASCAR, and every other sport that's in season. Let's talk about our sponsor, No House Advantage, who is taking a different spin on daily fantasy sports by offering player prop contests across the NBA, MLB, NFL, and PGA for cash prizes. This exclusively peer-to-peer fantasy sports platform levels the playing field and makes it easier for you to win real cash compared with your traditional DFS sites. The best part is you can join for free today. Download the No House Advantage app and use promo code Awesemo to receive a first match deposit bonus of up to $20. Be your friends, not the house. Win big with player props today. All right, let's get to last night's slate with a ton of late injury changes that we had at the end of the show as well as after the show. So guys, how did you make out last night? Ben, we'll start with you.
So thanks to Spags, things went well because I bet Portland on this show. I caught a great line because of that really close game. Miami led throughout, but late Dame, who was seemingly injured on every play, got it done. Other than that, it was pretty, the Knicks-Wizards game was a wild one, but the slate went well. I mean, the late hammer that we talked about, Kings, Warriors, wasn't great for guys like Halliburton and Poole, and that probably made a huge difference on the DFS side.
Yeah, I think for me it was a tale. We talked about it, have talked about it a good amount really the last few weeks for the late slate swap and sweat show. But by the end of the night, my lineups ended up looking completely different. And sometimes it's for the good. Sometimes it's for the much worse, where you end up going, for me yesterday, I ended up going from Draymond Green, who was a near 8K player on FanDuel and DraftKings, down to guys like Nicholas Batum. And I think there is a degree of quality you lose sometimes in these spots when you are having to change around for news that wasn't there. Kawhi Leonard got ruled out after the show. Then Marcus Morris also got ruled out after the show. So the pivot to the pivot ends up not being in play. It can be a bit of a tough moving target, but hopefully a lot of the news we have today in advance, and it's going to give some uncomfortable conversations and players to talk about today. But yesterday, I think it was fun. It's exciting. But then at the end of the night, if you end up with guys who are just substantially worse than you went in with, I think sometimes the joy is leaving the room a little bit with the NBA.
We have a lot of key news to get to, so we are going to kick that off right now with Damian Lillard being out for rest on a back-to-back for Portland at a shorthanded Orlando. Spags, is CJ McCollum a lock play today, given his previous massive role in games without Dame?
See, I think on FanDuel, he looks like a play that's going to be really tough to avoid, kind of like Paul George was yesterday, which ironically enough led to CJ McCollum being a pivot play that some people ended up profiting of, though I think for the most part, you probably needed both guys. I might be talking out my ass on that one, but for the most part, though, McCollum in this spot over the last year, he's been one of the better players in the league, really, without Damian Lillard on the floor. We did have some stints without Lillard last year, and CJ McCollum becomes about a 30% usage rate guy. The assist rate also just under 30%. And I think that spot really means for McCollum going against a shorthanded Orlando team who defensively wasn't offering much in some of the shorthanded games they had over the last month or so. Now they don't have Vucevic either. You don't have Gordon. You don't have Fournier. I think in this spot, Portland should be able to put up points, and a lot of it's going to flow through McCollum. So I think the only way you move away from him is in tournaments, but on his face, he's probably one of the best plays on the slate.
No doubt about it. He's going to be one of the highest owned plays on the slate, and that's always a potential deterrent in large field, but it's warranted. You just look at the situation without Dame, and he's worked back from injury, and it looks like he's kind of back now. He was fantastic last night. We're going to get to it. The Magic only have 8 guys. They're 9.5-point dogs at home here, so everything you want from the betting standpoint with McCollum, and the price on the DFS side is more than reasonable. So one of the highest owned players. Other than that, though, everything else checks out.
And now we get to Orlando. This is something. They will be without Cole Anthony, Wendell Carter Jr., Markelle Fultz, RJ Hampton, Gary Harris, Jonathan Isaac, Otto Porter Jr., Terrence Ross, Jeff Teague. Is that right?
Yep, Jeff Teague.
Perfect. As well as a traded Nikola Vucevic, Evan Fournier, Aaron Gordon, and Al Farouk Alminu. Ben, who benefits for the Magic? This is wild.
Well, anybody that is playing benefits. You know, they don't have many guys left. Certainly Dwayne Bacon, Michael Carter Williams, and literally anyone that's available is going to have to play a pretty sizable role. How it shakes out priority-wise, you know, just even looking at ownership and whatnot, it doesn't look like they're going to be reliant. You know, when this happened and Vooch was still there, it was like, okay, Vooch is going to carry the load. He's going to do all the usage. They got to play through him. Now I don't know exactly what they'll do. I mean, Dwayne Bacon, I think, is in a fantastic spot, but you have Birch, you have Carter Williams. There's a lot of ways they can go. I don't know if they can hang in the game, but these prices aren't a huge deterrent, just given the fact they legitimately only have 8 guys.
Yeah, I think for me, and this has been a guy who's burned me this past week where I ended up playing a little too much for him on the day where Terrence Ross and Chase and Randall got ruled out. But Michael Carter Williams is to me the one that jumps out. He is, you know, for all his moving around to different teams, he's definitely fallen out of favor because he's not really the perfect player for the modern NBA. But fantasy wise, he's been a guy that's always produced in every stop, a former rookie of the year. And he has had 30% usage in a very, very limited sample size of court time without many of the main Orlando stars. So I will be back his way. As Ben mentioned, Dwayne Bacon, I think, also is going to be in play. And Mo Bamba, assuming that he gets a start, this is kind of his spot here where it functionally, Orlando, I don't think is going to be able to overhaul their offense overnight. So you could see Bamba playing a very, very limited version of the role that Vooch was playing. And I think that definitely bodes well for him. But to me, I think I'm going to get the most Michael Carter Williams. I think Dwayne Bacon's probably one of the better value plays. And Mo Bamba, I think, is the one that people maybe will sleep on a little bit. Kem Birch certainly still a threat to take minutes, but it's an 8-man rotation. These guys have to play a good amount. And if you're Mo Bamba, I mean, this is your chance here before Wendell Carter comes in to show like, hey, you're still useful. You still are an asset too. And this could be the day he actually does prove it against the Portland team. It's also shorthanded.
Luka Doncic is doubtful for tonight's game versus Indiana. Spags, are there any core players from Dallas tonight without Luka?
Yeah, I think Jalen Brunson's going to be the one that immediately jumps out. He has been basically a different player in court time without Luka Doncic this year, where he does take a pretty good amount of Luka's role, certainly without the same 60, 70 fantasy point ceiling that we normally know from Luka. Kristaps Porzingis is probably the one I think you're going to get the most of really on both sides. I think on FanDuel, he looks to me a bit more unavoidable, but on DraftKings too, looks solid. And over the last year and change, he's had about a 30% usage rate, takes a bump in assists, bump and rebound, modest bump in rebounding, but still a decent bump in rebounding for him in court time without Luka. So I think Brunson and Doncic are the main guys, and Tim Hardaway Jr. is somebody I don't mind, but you know, it is sort of a question of really whether you're going to play more Magic and whether you're going to play more Mavericks. I think you're gonna have to watch the ownership closely because these plays could get less appealing if you end up seeing 99% Jalen Brunson compared to 10% Michael Carter Williams, which could be the case by the end of the night.
No doubt. I mean, this line has moved. The Mavericks are now a 1-point favorite, but Jalen Brunson stands out. I mean, you just look at when the minutes have been there, if he's pushed, 28 to 30 minutes and even more than that, he's absolutely crushed his price tag and where it falls tonight at 4,500 on DraftKings. If and when Luka sits, it's hard to imagine he doesn't get the run. It's hard to imagine the production doesn't follow. So the ownership's going to follow, as we always talk about. And there are on an 11-game slate, a lot of pivots, but if you're talking cash, you're talking, floor, I think Brunson's one of the safest options on the entire slate.
Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant remain out for Brooklyn versus Detroit with a questionable James Harden as well. This is the earliest game on the slate, so we should know Harden's status before lock. Ben, is he a must-have play if he's in?
No, I don't think he's a must play. Certainly, it's crazy. 11-game slate, there's a ton of superstars, but almost every one of them is hurt. So when you really look at it, there's actually not that many guys to pay up for. And if Harden is ruled in, he's in a great spot. There's no doubt about it. And you can absolutely go there. But it's still a situation where I think there's enough plays, whether it's Giannis and certainly just going with a more balanced build can be effective. So we'll have to wait. The good news is it is the first game. Right now, Brooklyn's a 6-point favorite, 219.5 total. Nothing really stands out there, but Harden's going to be in play. We know that. It's just a matter of how much do you want to allocate and what's the opportunity cost of paying that type of price tag.
Yeah, I'm with Ben here. I think because of the salaries involved, the fact that it's an 11-game slate, I was kind of surprised. I did a quick sort and crunch on FanDuel before the show and ended up with Harden only in 60% of my lineups, which normally in a spot where you have no Kyrie, no Kevin Durant, that makes Harden to me look mostly unavoidable. But I think because there are some different ways to construct lineups, some ways too to get less ownership to construct lineups on shooting guard or point guard on DraftKings for Harden, I think you are going to maybe see a bit less Harden today. That said, he's still one of the best plays on the slate because I think especially because of what Ben mentioned, where you have so many guys who are out today. Giannis is a pivot, I think, who's still there, or just paying down the positions of pivot. But I think Harden's going to be one of the guys you can build around today. Know he's going to give you probably around 60 fantasy points. And I think that is still worth getting a good amount of exposure, even if it's not the 100% it is probably on a 4 to 6 game slate.
Hamidou Diallo will make his debut for the Pistons in that same game, while they also expect to get Rodney McGruder back. Spags, how does this change the situation for Detroit?
So I think to me, this really starts to make Detroit look less appealing overall. And Jeremy Grant was one guy who I've talked about a lot this year, and he came through in a big way last game, and I think was really due for an outlier game because his usage had been up to around 32, 33% in games where you have seen Magruder out. But I think when you get Diallo in the mix, you have Diallo replacing fundamentally, for some level of minutes. We'll see how many minutes he can play today. I assume he's going to be limited to some extent, but he's replacing Delon Wright in the rotation, who's more of a guy who gets his fantasy value from rebounding and assisting. Diallo's going to get up shots. He's also going to assist a decent amount, but he's really a shot taker more than anything. So having Magruder back, who's had a shockingly high usage rate around 20% this year, having him back in the lineup, having Diallo back in the lineup, or in the lineup for the first time for Detroit, back playing for the first time in a while since he was on the Thunder. I think in this spot, it's just a lot of usage guys coming in now, or at least more usage guys. I don't think that's great for really anybody on Detroit who, when you don't have any outliers in terms of peripherals, you now have Jeremy Grant who's got to gun his way with other guys trying to gun their way. So for the most part, to me, even against Brooklyn, I don't think I'll end up with many Pistons tonight.
Totally agree. Just a situation that we don't know. And a lot of times that breeds uncertainty in terms of upside. Here, I think it really just caps everybody. There's a lot of guys fighting for those minutes. The usage is going to be dispersed, and everyone's price is going to need a little time to adjust to just the new personnel that's there. So, of course, the matchup with Brooklyn's always enticing. But when you look at these guys, particularly, the Bays, the Jacksons of the world, there's just an unknown that I don't think I'm willing to pay for what I would view as marginal ceiling in this situation. So we'll wait and see. It'll be interesting, but this just makes it that much more difficult to get to the Pistons tonight.
Goran Dragic has already been ruled out, along with new acquisition Victor Oladipo, while Jimmy Butler is questionable for Miami versus Charlotte. After huge days from Tyler Hero, Bam, and Kendrick Nunn without Butler yesterday, Ben, how are you handling Miami?
So yeah, this isn't similar to yesterday when we got the news right at the end. We have to see Jimmy Butler, of course, is the huge news. Without him, these guys are going to be tasked for major minutes again. Kendrick Nunn, you just mentioned, all these guys had really effective games. They easily could have won that game against Portland, lost it right at the end. Now, if Jimmy Butler's ruled in, it's certainly going to make a hit to all those guys' production. I don't know, though, if I really want to go to Jimmy Butler in his own right, though, at the same time. He's flat 9. I think that's a reasonable tag. But again, 11 games coming off. I don't know if there'll be any minutes reduction. It's just not the best spot in the world. So that's the swing. He affects the other guys, but I don't think he's firmly in play if he is ruled in.
Yeah, I think Butler's at a tough price point to get to today, where you have so much value and you have some very high octane, high upside guys who are going to be the pay up options there. And I don't mind Butler in tournaments, but I would agree, like, the better situation for DFS is going to be if Butler is out again. And I think Kendrick Nunn actually projects pretty well for me right now, even with Butler in. I think he would become a play that would be unavoidable if Butler's out. Tyler Hero, one thing that jumped out, I think it's something that people maybe missed, including myself yesterday, where there's a lot more assists to go around because of not having Butler, not having Dragic, and also not having Kelly Olynyk, who is actually a pretty good assist man as a big. So you saw more opportunity for Bam, more minutes for Bam. You also saw more opportunity for Tyler Hero creating his own shot, a bit more in the second unit away from Kendrick Nunn and mostly away from Gabe Vincent as well. So I think really there's a lot of opportunity if Butler's out, but if Butler is in, I think you're just kind of mixing and matching Heat players, and Kendrick Nunn, I think, would still be pretty high up there for me, but it's a difference between guys like Adebayo and Nunn, and I think Hero to a lesser extent being lock plays if Butler is out, whereas if Butler is in, these guys are just kind of flyers to take some of.
One of our favorite Garys in the league, Gary Trent Jr. and Rodney Hood, will make their debuts for Toronto against Phoenix. Spags, do these two or any other Raptors gain an appeal with Norman Powell shipped out of town?
I know for Awesemo, it seemed like OG Anunoby was taking a big jump on the props because of not having Powell in there. And the assumption normally with how most projection models are going to work is that if Norman Powell shoots X amount of threes, those 3-pointers then get dispersed amongst the remaining Raptors left. You do also have a couple of guys out of that lineup with Terrence Davis and Thomas as well, guys who did put up threes when they were on the floor. So I think there's a trickle down for him that makes sense more on the prop betting market to me than the DFS market. But Pascal Siakam, I think, is the one that from where I was looking at things did seem to jump out a bit more. Seems like he's getting more minutes than expected from Awesemo than average. And I think too, just there being the trickle down effect, there's going to be more usage to go around. And Kyle Lowry, Fred VanVleet, those guys are fundamentally distributors. So I think Siakam could benefit. And then maybe Anunoby is a little better on a DFS site than I'm thinking right now. But I think for me, it was mostly the prop bet markets for Anunoby and DFS wise for Siakam.
Yeah, Siakam would be the guy that stands out. I mean, speaking directly to them, Gary Trent should get run, but I don't think it's enough. And again, there's just so much unknown about how will he actually fit in. I don't think it's really worthy of backing something like that blindly, whereas we know that Siakam, of course, is going to be in a major role regardless of the situation. So we'll see. I know, the Raptors are trying to make a run. They ultimately didn't deal Lowry. I don't mind the pieces. We talked about this yesterday on the show. I don't think it moves the needle much. And even in the DFS side of it, I think ultimately maybe a little more production for those type of guys, but this isn't a game changer with the switch from Powell to these two who shipped in.
Lonzo Ball is doubtful for New Orleans, while Nickeil Alexander-Walker has been over 31 minutes in the 2 games Ball recently missed. Ben, is Nickeil a top play versus Denver?
Yeah, I mean, he certainly makes sense. There's going to be some production up for grabs there. This is a good game, certainly one. I have a couple things in mind. There are 2.5-point dogs at home, 232 total, which is not surprising considering the Pelicans are involved. And yeah, without Lonzo, I mean, this is a reasonable tag. The minutes are there. He's not this is not a huge distributor. It's not like he's going to rack up 10 assists or anything like that, but he's still going to have the ball in his hands. Certainly going to have the liberty to take some shots as he's been doing, can get hot from 3. I like the Pelicans as a whole today. I kind of think they win this game, and he could be a major part of it.
Yeah, I think Nickeil's going to have some room to create shots for others as well as get his own shot today. And I think he's shown too. I mean, the minutes have been there, as Kayla mentioned up top, over 31 minutes. And Awesemo has been for 33 minutes today, which I think seems like a reasonable one, given that I think he was at 34 last game. So in this spot, I think Nickeil Alexander-Walker is really the main one that benefits. I still don't mind going to Brandon Ingram. Zion is always going to have the ceiling just because there's raw points potential. But Lonzo being out, these guys aren't currently priced, I think, highly enough for the absence of Lonzo. Even Eric Bledsoe, I think you can make an argument for, which is never a fun thing, but really there's a lot of guys you can get to here. They're not sort of the core plays to me as in Orlando, because you're just replacing Lonzo Ball with another player in a lineup. You still have Zion, you still have Ingram. It's not like having Luka out for the Mavs or having all the Magic players out for Orlando, but it's still a spot where if you're getting Nickeil Alexander-Walker, he's probably deserving of high ownership, just not as much of a must-have play as some of the other value plays in his range.
Golden State will likely be without Steph Curry and possibly also Draymond Green after he was a late injury absence yesterday. Does anyone have a big appeal for the Warriors versus Atlanta, Spags?
I think Juan Toscano-Anderson could be a good play again today. And it was something I mentioned on the Late Slate Show with EMAC yesterday, where there was one game before the All-Star break where Draymond was out and it was all the Warrior scrubs. So I think Wiggins is also out in that game. So really it was just, guys who don't play a lot getting an opportunity. Oubre was out. And I think in that spot, Toscano-Anderson was looking a lot like Draymond Green, trying to play the same role, which he's also done in the G League in the past. And last night he had the same thing. He was doing that role again where he's rebounding pretty well, rebounding more aggressively, assisting at a decent level, getting some shots up. I think Toscano-Anderson is really the only one who benefits if those guys are out today. Steph Curry's, I think, definitely much more likely to be out than not. Draymond, we'll see. But really, if Draymond ends up out, I think it's Toscano-Anderson, and you have a better case, too, to go to guys like Jordan Poole or Wiggins. But I think really Toscano-Anderson still value Jason play. I think he'd be a guy I'd look to first.
Yeah, and that price point, just going back to a guy like Harden, if he's ruled in, that's the type of play you could pair up for some salary relief. And then you look at Wiggins is coming off the massive game. Poole was a little disappointing. I think I would lean to Poole tonight, just kind of on recency bias, if nothing else. The ownership is not going to be a fraction of what we saw last night. It's a totally different slate. So we'll have to see what's up with the Warriors here. It's not an appealing game on the betting side of things. It's just kind of two teams that I have no interest in, but there are some value, particularly as Spags talked about it with the cheapies for Golden State.
And our last nugget of key news for the day, Colin Sexton is questionable for Cleveland in the last game on the slate against the Lakers after he missed last game. Ben, is there anyone worth planning around in that game on the chance Sexton is out?
I mean, if he sits, we saw this against the Bulls. Certainly Garland was impressive, took a ton of shots, and I think he's going to have to do that again here. Played 37 minutes as well. So you can look to him. And the most thing I was impressed, I know it's one game, but he had 9 assists in that game. So maybe he takes on more of a distributor role in addition to needing to kind of do everything for the Cavs in this situation. I don't really have a strong take on if Sexton will sit in the game. Like you said, he's sporting the Q tag. But I guess if he does sit, you could look to some guys there. They're 4-point dogs against the wounded Lakers. 208 total. That's not great, but it's the last game. Certainly, late stop would come into play there if Sexton sits.
I think if Sexton sits, Garland is definitely going to take a pretty big jump. As Ben mentioned, Garland had a lot of usage in that game, had a 20%, had put up 20 shots in the game, had 9 assists as well. So that's definitely him gobbling up a lot of the possessions. But I think really, to me, this is one I just wouldn't want to plan around right now because Sexton is at a reasonable price. And I guess you could, global swap to Garland if you only played Sexton at point guard. So maybe that's one thing you could do. But I don't know that Garland has enough of an upside to really trust at 6,800 on DK, 6,500 on FanDuel. Like, those are okay prices. They're not great. I think knowing that you have to sort of plan your entire lineup then around the idea that, hey, maybe I'm going to, waste $600 just to get to a slightly better Darius Garland at the end of the night. I don't know that's the move. I think Larry Nance, though, could take a bit of a jump up as well because really Sexton being out of there just opens up possessions. And a guy like Nance will get more rebounds, get more assists, really just create more opportunities for himself. But I think those aren't ones that I would plan around. And I think that's sort of the key difference. Whereas if you're playing a late slate and Sexton's out, like, yeah, you have to jam Garland in. But right now with Sexton being a game time decision, I think you just got to play the slate and just kind of assume Cleveland doesn't exist because that's probably the best move relative to pricing.
Good stuff. All right, you guys, MLB opening day is April 1st, and we have a deal for you. Get your first 9 days of Awesemo Plus MLB for only $9 when you use promo code STARTING9. That's starting with the number 9. This gives you access to everything we have to offer for MLB DFS, including player projections, ownership projections, top stacks, lineup builder, and our premium Slack channel. This offer is valid through April 9th. Stop guessing, start winning. Join Awesemo Plus MLB today. Moving right along to our one-on-one in these battles between stars, which player would you guys rather have in NBA DFS or prop bets tonight? First up, we have Giannis. He's coming off one of his worst fantasy games of the year after a 35 fantasy point game versus Boston. James Harden missed the back end of a back-to-back versus Utah, but could be back tonight without Kyrie or KD versus Detroit. Ben, who wins in this one-on-one, Giannis or Harden?
I'm going to go with Harden. Just a product of kind of when we've seen him on the court, he can do everything without the other portions of the big three there. The minutes should be there. The matchup with Detroit is fine. And then, I know you just mentioned baseball, like the BVP of the NBA, but the Celtics seem to do a good job against Giannis at times. They know they certainly have experience with it. They play him all the time. They've battled with him in the playoffs. It's not to say that they can just stop him, but they do have at least a plan. And we've seen at times, in this most recent game, certainly it was highlighted, where Giannis just isn't nearly as effective. So we know these guys both have massive upside. Looking at the projections, they're 2 of the highest projected guys on the entire slate. If I could only play one, though, I'd go with Harden.
Yeah, I think I'm on the same page as Ben here. I like Giannis. I like the idea of him trying to redeem himself, even though I think Ben's right that it's worth noting they've played in the playoffs before. They have Boston has done a really good job, at least finding ways to sell out to try to stop Giannis, whether they get that result or not. And, the one thing that I would say is having Tice out of the lineup for Boston gives me some concern. I don't think Robert Williams can be the sort of agitator, harasser of Giannis that Tice can sometimes be. So that's one thing I would note for there. But you're really still looking at, hey, you're trying to justify playing Giannis more, whereas Harden just is going to have all the opportunity against the Detroit team that, they have more guys in their stead. But Hamidou Diallo isn't a great defender. I think, having these Rodney McGruder, really not a great defender. I think a decent defender, but not a guy you're going to be afraid of. Having those guys back in for Detroit doesn't change anything and maybe makes them a little bit worse defensively when they're already a bad defensive team. So if Harden's in, I think he's much more of a core play. And Giannis is a pivot that you can take some flyers on. If you get a way to get to Giannis and Harden, I think that makes sense DFS wise, but as a core building block, it just has to be Harden over Giannis.
Jarrett Allen stands to see a few more minutes today with JaVale McGee and Isaiah.
His rebounds, but I don't think is going to necessarily stop Harrell. I think he's just going to kind of get the better of him from time to time. I think Harrell's really the play to me fantasy wise, where he hasn't really shown a gigantic ceiling in these games without LeBron, but the sample size does indicate of games without him and AD that for the most part, Harrell's going to have better results. And I think this could be the day today against Cleveland at the late, the end of the slate, late night hammer, all that stuff. I think Harrell could be a really intriguing play to go to.
Yeah, I mean, I think like anything, you have to put it in the context of the pricing. And to me, I was a little shocked to see it kind of a gap. But, Jared Allen is someone, he absolutely has a ceiling. But I think there's a lot of middling performances in there. Where you look at Harrell, we kind of know what he's going to get to a more extent. And just the Cavs front court, they're in shambles. We already talked, maybe Sexton doesn't even play. I think that puts further strain on it. Harrell, I trust just a little more. The efficiency will be there. Certainly going to be live to dominate in the post. So minutes secure. I know they're hurting without LeBron, but the Lakers have kind of been dealing with this for a while now. So I'll go to him and save some money, which to me is actually a little surprising when I think about the two.
Dwayne Bacon and Jalen Brunson are two normally not crucial players who will be highly owned as a result of missing teammates for the Magic and Mavs respectively tonight. Ben, which cheap chalk play wins this one-on-one, Bacon or Brunson?
So even though I'm ironically wearing a shirt that just says bacon on it, I'm going to say Brunson just because without Luka, when the minutes are there, he's just so efficient. I think he'll control that game. It's going to be a competitive one against the Pacers. We know that the Magic guys are going to need to play a lot, but we talked about this earlier, Michael Carter-Williams maybe, but other than that, it's just a lot of guys with some opportunity. I don't know how the priorities fall, and they could get blown out. It doesn't mean they'll pull them off the court because there's not that many guys on the bench, but I feel much more secure with Brunson, and I have a feeling the public does as well.
Yeah, I think I'm on the same page for this one too. I think Brunson is a very solid play today. A guy maybe you can question the ceiling of a little bit for tournaments, but for the most part, you know what you're going to be getting. You're going to be getting probably around 30 minutes from him, probably a good fantasy point per minute, maybe upwards of that. I think those are all positive things for Brunson that you could build around him at his price point. Whereas Bacon, I think is fine. He's going to get the opportunities we talked about earlier. There's only 8 guys available for the Magic, or at least, barring some weird move that they're making that we're not aware of doing the show right now. But I think that sort of does mean there's a lot of opportunity for Bacon. He's a fine value play, but still a guy who's not an assist man, not a rebounder at any sort of volume. Wouldn't shock me if Bacon has the down game, whereas guys like Michael Carter-Williams or Chasen Randall and Mo Bamba and Khem Birch have better days because you have guys there who rebound, guys who assist, guys who rebound and assist. And I think that's something that Bacon doesn't have. He just kind of has to get there through pure scoring, and he's not a pure scorer. So take a guy in Brunson who actually gets points, gets assists, does a little bit more in a spot where there's a lot left behind with no Luka in there.
Ben, I can't believe I missed your shirt. We got in the chat so late today that I didn't even get to see what you all were wearing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
No leather jacket, but I got bacon, so.
That's all you need.
That's all you need. That's right.
One of the biggest edges in sports betting is always shopping to find the best line. Betting lines change by the minute and can vary greatly depending on which book you are using. That's why it's important to use Awesemo's Odd Shopper to find the best line available on the game, player, or prop you are betting on and give you that edge to help you beat the house. Head on over to oddshopper.awesemo.com where we compile the best bets available for game lines, player props, player, and team futures, all updated in real time. It is time for the Dr. Ben Rasa prop bet of the day. And he is on an impressive win streak, folks, now up to 9-0 on tip-off shows. Dr. Ben, your demeanor is nearly as positive as your betting slips as you continue to accumulate winners like a child racks up Pokemon on a Nintendo Switch. This read is great, guys. With your picks as hot as a fireball from Charizard and your on-camera presence as electric as Pikachu at the club, what nuggets of wisdom do you bring for the Dr. Ben Rasa prop bet of the day for today's slate? Holy crap, what did I just read?
Yeah, we all need to take a moment. Good work, Spags, as usual. Just we
have to find our slivers of joy somewhere in life, and mine is making Kayla read long-winded things that somehow really make Ben look great, I think. And you are, to me, Ben, as electric as Pikachu in the club, as Kayla so warmly said.
That's words to live by. Yeah, listen. Yesterday was, we were talking about this on the show. When you have props, sometimes volume kind of trumps it. And I was fortunate. Beal took 7 threes last night. That was a little more than I was expecting. He made 2. That's a win, but not exactly what I planned. And, when you get on a run, sometimes you get a fortunate bounce. We're going to try to take advantage. Originally, I was going to say Luka in the spot. He is hurt. So I had to go to a backup plan today. We are going to the Nuggets and the Pelicans game, and I'm going with Zion's points, rebounds, assists prop. So his points plus his rebounds plus his assists, it sits at 38.5 total. I'm going over. It's a straight toss-up, minus 113 on both sides. And this is just a situation where, Denver's front court, obviously they've got some impressive players, but, they give up a lot of peripherals. They're second worst in the league in opponent assists per game. The Pelicans rebound at an outstanding rate. score a lot in transition. And then you just look at Zion. He's been on a tear, extremely efficient. They just played this game, this team. He was 9 of 13 there. And with Lonzo down, maybe he does pick up, some of the distribution. We talked about Walker's not exactly a point guard, and I'm not saying Zion is, but I do think it's up for grabs. So when you look at how many real points that he's scoring, you only need a handful of assists, and certainly the boards I think will be there. So 38.5, I'm going over. We're going to try to tack on another W here, but the more important question is Spags. Are you with me, or are you shorting this one?
So I was, I pushed back against Ben yesterday, and Ben, even with Beal getting up 7 3-pointers, as Ben mentioned, didn't hit. So I'm reluctant to go back to the well of pushing back on Ben here, but I do have Zion coming in at 35.5 for my projection right now. And that could be off. I think, Zion, the one thing with him is even if the assist upside isn't there as much, and I think that's really my big concern for Zion on a fantasy perspective most days is that with Lonzo out is that you're getting more Kira Lewis minutes, which is not great when he's sharing minutes alongside Alexander Walker and Kira Lewis, two guys who are, kind of distributors, even though Alexander Walker certainly loves to get his own shot up. But I do think Zion can brute force his way there enough for Denver or against Denver that even if he gets a little bit less on the way of assists or a little bit less in the way of rebounds, wouldn't shock me if he put up 40 real life points here just because Denver's not that good. And Zion, who are you going to have at him? Paul Millsap, Michael Porter Jr. It's going to be bad, whoever they put up against Zion. So I'm with Ben on the over here, even though on a median projection basis, which is, doesn't tell the whole story, I would say I would come under. And I just want Ben to be right. Double-digit victory here without a single loss, I think would be so monumentous for us as a show that we just need to ride Ben's coattails at this point.
Yeah, we're going to try. And I do think I just want to echo that point real quick. With Zion, this is not one where I have it pegged in the sense of okay, he's going to have around this many points, this many boards, this many assists. He's so volatile in a good way that I think you could get bailed out by a 35 real point effort. And he has, 3 boards and 2 assists and you get there. I kind of like that aspect of this. And in a game with a 232 total, I feel comfortable there's range of outcomes within it where Zion gets there, even if he doesn't put up the peripherals. If he does, that's fantastic. And I'll certainly take him. But I kind of like having that extra out in the situation as Spags talked about.
Ben, I just want to reiterate that the success of the show is riding on you. So no pressure.
Oh yeah, no pressure. Listen, obviously, you get lucky, you string something together. It's been fun. I'm having a blast doing it, chat. I hope you guys have been enjoying it. We're gonna keep it going and turn the page to next week. Come back, hopefully still on the run. That's the plan.
Love it. We're going to turn the page on this segment, moving over to No House Advantage, prop or not. Here are some of No House Advantage's props of the day for key players. Do you like the over or under on them? Guys, how many points would you assign? First up, we've got Kristaps Porzingis over under 20.5 points. Spags, what do you take in here?
Yeah, I think this is one where we talk about a lot in the show, and this is sort of the point of the segment, really, is to give you guys kind of a good lead. We will occasionally talk about 50-50 props on the site, but, for the most part, No House Advantage, the best props you're going to build a lineup around, much like a chalk play on the DFS site, is going to be the plays that, are either undervalued or just priced incorrectly. And this line for Porzingis is a line that has Luka expected to be in. When Luka is out, you are not going to have the same situation. Porzingis, I think, in any projection model, will safely project over 20.5 points. So you can get different if you want to go to a points plus rebounds prop, maybe a points plus assist prop. So that way you're covering the bases in case Kristaps assists a bit more than he does just get straight shots up. But either way, there's going to be more performance from Porzingis today. And I think pinpointing that to me on No House Advantage would be probably my 10 or 9 pointer on the slate today.
Yeah. I mean, you just mentioned it. The Luka news is a game changer, and going over to Odd Chopper, just looking at this, Porzingis's prop is up to 23.5. So you're stealing multiple points there. Anytime you see that, that's an immediate go sign. So you're going to put this one towards the top, and it's for that reason, because simply said, they can't react to it and we can. So anytime you get that, you want to absolutely try to take advantage.
CJ McCollum over under 23.5 points and assists. Ben, what do you like here?
So this is another one that I'm going to go over, and it's the same concept. Lillard being out, McCollum was absolutely fantastic last night. The Magic have no players. That's probably a good thing. So when you I don't have to be a doctor to let you know that if you get that situation, it's probably best to lean to the over.
Yeah, for me, I think with just points and assists, I would have CJ McCollum closer to 35 than to the prop that's there. And I think this is another one. Same thing when you have a guy like Damian Lillard in the lineup, he has about a 30% usage rate, has an assist rate of upwards of 40%. Like those are numbers that when you come off the floor, those have to go somewhere. And CJ McCollum historically, my sample size that I pulled was going back to last year, as I mentioned earlier in the show, 32% usage, 30% assist rate. Like those are very good things for McCollum, where he's not full Damian Lillard, but it's close enough to it. And previously in games without Lillard, we saw McCollum get up to 9K, I think just shy of 10K when he was on a really nice run last year, playing that role, playing that imposter Damian Lillard. I think in this spot against Orlando, who has been mentioned, there's just nobody left. Like there's nobody to defend. I don't see any way you could talk yourself out of CJ. He's going to be playing bootleg Damian Lillard against an outright bad team. I think the only way he doesn't get there is if there's somehow a Portland blowout that doesn't involve him, which seems very unlikely.
John Wall over under 7.5 assists, Spags.
This is one too where I think it's not quite the same situation as some of these other ones where I think John Wall has been sort of priced more appropriately than a Porzingis prop without Luka or McCollum prop without Damian Lillard. But I think John Wall here, no Kevin Porter expected today, Victor Oladipo out of town, still no Eric Gordon. You do have Augustine back in the lineup, so I guess that's something or available in the lineup now for the last few games. It does take a little bit away, but for the most part, John Wall is the entire vessel for this offense besides Christian Wood playing some big man point guard for a few plays per game. I think really that's the opportunity here. There's a risk, I guess, that Houston gets blown out. They have been pretty bad, and John Wall got blown out as chalk the other day. But for a prop bet, I think going over on John Wall's assists, to me, I think for a line that's probably not all the way there, I think is still probably going to be the move for me, even though also not one of the better props on the board. So probably in the range of a 3 or 4 pointer on no house advantage.
So this is one actually, you don't, unless you're really being aggressive, you're rarely going to try to take an aggressive stand because you just have other props to go to. But I will say the betting line is sitting at 7.5, and there's not massive juice on the over. So this is one that I think that it is very possible that Wall doesn't have a massive assist total game. It sets up fine. It's nothing like that. But when you're looking at props, as Spags talked about, that have key news that impact them, this is not one of them. So although he may end up over this prop, this is not one that would even come close to my top priorities. To me, I actually do kind of view it as a coin toss. So that's a stay away for me.
All right. And friends, don't forget to play on No House Advantage, our sponsor, who is taking a different spin on daily fantasy sports by offering player prop contests across the NBA, MLB, NFL, and PGA for cash prizes. This exclusively peer-to-peer fantasy sports platform levels the playing field and makes it easier for you to win real cash compared with your traditional DFS sites. The best part is you can join for free today. Just download the No House Advantage app and use promo code Awesemo to receive a deposit bonus of up to $20. 4 new signups. Beat your friends, not the house. Win big with player props today. Let's head over to our DFS hedge. How can you hedge daily fantasy lineups with a bet like taking the over on a prop for a player you're fading tonight? Spags, will start with you.
Yeah, I'm trying to guess what this would be today. And I think sometimes as Ben and Greg and some of the other guys who've been on the show recently have talked about, Eric as well, the hedge sometimes becomes a little more obvious later in the night where you know how things sit. And if you need, let's say, Montrezl Harrell to go off, then maybe betting against the Lakers or betting some prop for Marc Gasol might be the move. But I think based on how I'm viewing things so far right now, I think taking the spread for actually, where's Portland at? Because I think taking the spread for Portland against Orlando seems like one that is a little still too close to what I'm expecting to be a pretty good amount of CJ McCollum exposure. But I think for me, that's a spot where I'm really going to be banking around guys like Michael Carter-Williams and Mo Bamba today. And to a lesser extent, Dwayne Bacon. I think these guys just being competent is really what I'm hoping and capable of being NBA players. Big ask by me, I'm sure, as somebody betting money on them. But to me, if I'm going to play a lot of Orlando, I think just taking Portland in the money line or taking Portland in the spread rather would be the move just to cover your DFS losses potentially if guys like Michael Carter-Williams and Dwayne Bacon and Mo Bamba just straight up don't show up, which is still a possibility.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think that's the game you want to target. McCollum, you could do something there, but as I say often, 11-game slate's not the best to hedge.
All right. Don't forget to check out the new win percentage and ROI percentage tools on oddshopper.awesemo.com to see some of the highest probability bets, according to Alex Awesemo Baker, every single night. Heading right on over to Good Dog, Bad Dog. I don't know if Tyler has the sound effect or not.
Oh, that's right. Oh, Tyler. It's on the run sheet, Tyler. What are you doing? Just get me some goddamn
There it is. In real life, we know there's no such thing as a bad dog. In betting and DFS, there are a lot of underdogs who may have no chance in their games. So who is a good dog to target tonight and who's a bad one? Ben, let's start with your good dog.
Pelicans plus 2.5 at home. They just beat this team. Again, I think Zion and Ingram can have major success. I don't worry about Lonzo being out. It's going to be an up and down game. I think that's exactly how they want to play naturally. I like the Nuggets a lot. And I think when Aaron Gordon gets there, watch out. But that's not tonight. Live dog at home for sure.
I think my good dog is going to be Toronto. I think Phoenix being a road favorite makes sense based on what we've seen this year. Toronto has certainly underperformed, but I do think with Toronto consolidating possessions, more to probably go more to Van Vliet, to go more to Lowry, to go more to Siakam, I think is going to be a good thing. And I like Norman Powell as a player, but I think overall for Toronto, just there's going to be something here to them keeping Lowry. I think there's a bit of a dead cat bounce, to use an old stock market term or whatever the case may be, of just them losing Lowry and then getting him back. It's basically like, getting your team's best player ever. I know a lot of Raptors fans believe that. Getting him to stay is kind of a sentimental moment. So it wouldn't shock me if they show up in a big way and maybe surprise Phoenix in a game that the home team is still an underdog. And that's always a positive thing, I think, betting wise.
Did you say a dead cat bounce?
Yeah, it's an old stock term, which
thing.
honestly, I said it out loud and was like, I don't know if that term should exist anymore because it feels kind of mean to dead cats, but there's no dead cats watching this show, so fuck them.
No. Who's your bad dog? Back to you.
My bad dog is going to be Memphis. I think in this spot, being a 9-point dog at Utah, we have seen one thing they do is, they do put teams away. They put away that Brooklyn team the other night, exactly like they were supposed to. Poor Joe Harris may never show his face in public again after that game. And I think in this spot, Memphis more competent, Memphis very deep, but this is a spot to me that I think Memphis just runs too deep, and you're going to get less quality minutes from guys because you're expecting them to be as efficient when they're not getting as much court time as they probably would another team. So I think having that 10, 11, 12 man rotation that Memphis has, not a good thing against Utah. So I think Utah puts them away pretty easily.
Totally in line. Of course, people could say the Magic, they're not going to play well either, but I think the Grizzlies are in a bad spot going into Utah. No interest in them in any format. I'm probably potentially going to bet the Jazz if I had to. I don't really want to lay 10 points, but yeah, that's a bad spot for Memphis.
All right. And our make or break, which player or game currently looks like a make or break spot to you on tonight's slate, Dr. Rasa?
I will say right before that, chat, it's good to see everybody on this Friday. I will be doing March Madness content tomorrow with Matt G. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for us. We really appreciate that. And I need all the juju, because what's make or break for me? It's Zion. He needs to get over so I can keep this going and the show can keep the momentum. We're going to try our best here. I think the Pelicans are the key for me. I really think they're going to play well, and I think Zion's a huge part of that.
I think my key for me today is going to be Michael Carter-Williams, who I hate being my key. But the thing is, to me, especially with Michael Carter-Williams, I played him a stupid amount the other day in a day where it made less sense to play him a lot. So I would be the fool to not go back and play him heavily in the hopes that he can play his redemption song for me. So that's my make or break. And then we'll find out how that goes in a late slate show coming up later today. I think it's 6:30 West Coast time, 9:30 East Coast time. I don't know. Subscribe to the notification bell and you'll find out when I do and have to do a show.
In our last 30 seconds here, fade of the day, is there one player, game, or team you anticipate you'll have a lot less interest in than the rest of the public? Spags?
I think based on the ownership run that we had before the show, I want to get less of Maxi Kleber. I think is going to be one for me on FanDuel. And then for DraftKings, I think coming in under Anfernee Simons seems like the one. Simons hasn't historically gained as much as people think, and it seems like he should gain in games without one of Lillard or McCollum, and I think that's going to be the case again there. So Simons on DraftKings, Kleber on FanDuel.
I think Giannis in general, I don't anticipate an explosion game, but if that happened, that would probably be bad for me because I'll be backing the Celtics most likely in that spot.
Awesome stuff. Ben, Spags, thanks for your time today. Thank you all for tuning in. Hope you all have a great weekend. The deeper dive and live before locker up next. As Ben said, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. I'm Kayla Knierim. We'll see you guys next week.
Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome to the Awesemo.com NBA Deeper Dive presented by SuperDraft. Got a nice little 11-game slate tonight, and we've got a lot of trades that happened yesterday, so there should be a lot of value on tonight's slate. Should be a good one. Got Adam ShipMyMoney Scherer here helping break it down. Adam, how you doing, man?
Doing good. Should be a lot to talk about. There is a lot of value, like you said, a lot of moving pieces. Not a lot to pay up for now that we have some guys that we thought were going to play that don't look like they're going to, but tons of value.
Yeah, definitely. With we had Lillard ruled out and Luka doubtful, so that was some pretty big pieces. Let's talk about the trades real quick before we get into the game by game breakdown. But before we do, guys, we need to get these likes up. I was told we're not going to get paid for this show unless we get to 500 likes. So please help a brother out. Hit that thumbs up, and if you're not already subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button. Okay, I might have made that up, but if you can help, thank you. One of the teams that had the most trades was Orlando. They basically traded off their whole roster. Were there any other trades that you feel like are going to have a big impact today?
No, I think that was the most impactful because they're only going to have 8 players today. Like, there's a couple of teams that we haven't gotten word yet on if the players they acquired are going to be active or not, but we've already gotten word that none of the guys the Magic picked up are going to be there. So they have 8 bodies to play today. None of the bodies are very good. So it makes for a really, really interesting spot in Orlando. Outside of that, not as much. Like you talk about, I think one that has a big impact, obviously, is Norman Powell going to Portland and Gary Trent and Rodney Hood coming back to Toronto. Trent and Hood both probable for the Raptors. Powell still up in the air for Portland. But from a DFS standpoint, those guys don't make a huge impact other than the fact that if they play, the minutes go to them. But from rostering them, they're not really that exciting. We're waiting on news in Boston for Mo Wagner and Luke Cornett. I don't think that makes a huge difference. For the most part, I think Orlando's the team that the trades really impact on this slate.
Yeah, it's crazy how Boston was going for Vucevic and they got Mo Wagner instead.
Yeah, same thing.
Pretty much. So that'll be an interesting one. Guys, before we get into the game by game breakdown, I got 2 things. First of all, today is Laffy's birthday. So everybody make sure to wish Laffy a happy birthday. He's got the day off today. So not on any shows, but hopefully he's enjoying the day. Also, we're sponsored today by SuperDraft. They've partnered with Caesars Casino, and they've really been upping their game ever since this partnership. Tonight, they have the 20K jump shot, 4K to first. And they have the multiplier system instead of salary cap, so you can play whoever you want. And it's a pretty fun format. You can use the promo code Awesemo21 to get $50 free when you deposit 50 or more. Also, the URL is superdraft.io. So check out SuperDraft. Our first game, Brooklyn at Detroit. We just got the news here that Harden will play. So I'm sure that we'll swing the needle a little bit in Brooklyn's favor because they didn't do too well with him out the other night, I'd say. So what are you expecting with the Nets now that Harden is playing?
I mean, I'm really glad that he's playing because we didn't need more value on this slate. We did need somewhere to spend some money. And slates where James Harden is playing without anyone else on his team are always fun because he always gets a lot of ownership, but it normally seems like he still doesn't get enough. Like people talk themselves into going somewhere else when, even though he's clearly, the top play on the slate, whenever he's in this situation, going back 3 years in games without Westbrook, without Paul, without John Wall this season, without Irving and Durant since joining Brooklyn, pretty consistently across the board, about 1.75 fantasy points per minute, usage rates up around 40%, assist percentage up over 40%. His rebounding numbers in general this year are up since going to Brooklyn. Everything's, looks great for him. And, I'm sure there's some number of people saying something about the injury, but he was questionable 2 games ago and played 40 minutes. Then he sat on the second half of a back-to-back. I'm not knocking his projection or my thoughts on him because he's dealing with, with neck cramps or whatever it is.
Yeah, if he's playing today, that says enough for me, especially given it's Detroit. So pretty good matchup here. I think Harden is going to be one of those spend ups that we need to be prioritizing today because of the matchup and the fact that Katie and Irving are out. What about the rest of the Nets? Not too many moves from the Nets at the trade deadline, but we got a couple guys out. We got Landry Shamet still out. And then 2 days ago, Alize Johnson joined the team and had a monster fantasy performance, much to chagrin of people who rostered him and got 0. So that was kind of a bummer. But do you see anything here for the Nets other than Harden?
No, nothing that stands out with Harden back. Obviously he takes a lot away from everyone else. And then you also just have some rising price points like Joe Harris up to 6,400 on DraftKings, Bruce Brown up to 5,800. They kind of were preemptively priced up in case Harden sat. So it makes them close to useless with Harden back. The one spot I am paying attention to, though, is I want to see what the starting lineup for the Nets looks like at center. Last game, we had DeAndre Jordan go to the bench. Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot started and Jeff Green started at center. The bigger thing, I don't really care that much about Jeff Green. I don't care that much about TLC. What I do care about is Nick Claxton. He started the second half of that game. If he were to slide into the starting lineup here, and DeAndre Jordan didn't play in the second half of that game. So if Claxton were to slide into the starting lineup, I think you could potentially see a few extra minutes for him. Like the center spot for Brooklyn, as the season goes on, I wouldn't be surprised if you see DeAndre Jordan get phased out and you see Nick Claxton get more minutes. You see Blake Griffin take on a bigger role along with Jeff Green. If Claxton starts here, it could be a sign that that's starting to happen, and he'd be worth a tournament flyer, I think. But still, the center position is also absolutely stacked on this slate.
They also did say, or at least Steve Nash said, that Blake Griffin, he feels like is best used at center. So I'm kind of wondering if Blake will get some starts in the future. I don't know if it'll be today, but we will know before the game starts. The other day it was crazy because it's like they had 2 guys that only play center, like Claxton and Jordan, and they're like, let's start neither of them.
Yeah, and then they played them alongside each other for a stretch too.
Oh man, that's wild. So Claxton, although he was a pretty good option before, we got to see how this rotation looks before we feel confident in that, or if he got the start. Now on Detroit, we had them trade Svi Mikhailiuk for Hamidou Diallo. Diallo is probable today. Besides that, nothing too big aside from they traded Delon Wright for Kojo. Now, I'm not sure. I don't think Kojo is in today, but the absence of Delon Wright does mean we're going to get some point guard value. So what are you seeing at Detroit?
Yeah, this is another one where I'm curious to see what the starting lineup looks like, because they don't necessarily need to really have anything viable for DFS here, even with Delon Wright gone, because you have Amadou Diallo probable, like you said, Wayne Ellington not on the injury report, Rodney Magruder probable, Frank Jackson, who had been starting, Dennis Smith Jr. is questionable. So you could just be getting this like just tons of guys coming back that had been out. But like if Dennis Smith Jr. sits and Saben Lee starts, then you have a $3,100 point guard that probably is playing like 26, 28 minutes. That would be kind of interesting. But like if Dennis Smith Jr. is in, I don't really feel confident going to much here, because for one, there's a million spots on the slate where you can find value that you actually can be confident in. And for two, like Dennis Smith Jr. is 4,600 on DraftKings. I don't think he plays enough minutes to really be a good play there on this particular slate. I wouldn't feel comfortable with Saben Lee if Smith is in, because I think there's a chance that you get, less than 48 minutes combined from those two. It just becomes a real mess if Dennis Smith Jr. is in, I think.
Yeah, I feel like on an ordinary slate, it could be worth taking shots on Smith and Lee. However, there's a lot of better plays today that have a little bit more clarity, because these 2 guys are really fighting for the minutes at point guard. But I don't mind taking a shot on Saben Lee at 3,100, given the price. Earlier in the season, we saw when he outplayed Smith, he'd get the minutes. So I'm sure you guys remember those big performances. Now with the rest of the team, Jeremy Grant had a big game the other day. His price, 7,800 on DraftKings and 7,300 on FanDuel, isn't looking particularly compelling. But are there any other Pistons you're interested in?
Not really. I mean, Grant obviously has a high ceiling. He's about a fantasy point per minute guy. He plays 34 to 36 minutes. Same goes for Mason Plumlee, who actually played about 29 minutes last game. But the concern with Plumlee is the same as it has been for a while now. More often than not, you're seeing Isaiah Stewart steal a number of minutes from him. And so I don't really feel comfortable expecting more than 26 or 27 minutes for Plumlee. Center, again, it's absolutely stacked. Like the top, you have Jokic and Towns, but also in the mid-range, there's a ton of guys that have very, very high ceilings. And so it makes me not really that interested in going to Mason Plumlee with any sort of frequency.
Same. Now the next game, Phoenix at Toronto. On Phoenix, it doesn't look like they made very many. I don't think they made any moves at the deadline. So we know pretty much what to expect out of the Suns. They got a decent matchup versus Toronto, but this might not be the easiest team to find value. What are you seeing in the Suns?
Yeah, that's what I think too. I mean, the main three guys, Chris Paul, Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton, certainly guys that have high enough ceilings. You can look to them in tournaments, but none of them stand out as top options, I don't think. Ayton is probably the most favorably priced, 6,100 on DraftKings, 6,500 on FanDuel. He's played at least 32 minutes in 3 straight games, which is good to see because in the previous 8 or 9, he had failed to reach 30. Overall this season, he's averaged 30 minutes per game, but he's another one where I think he kind of just gets pushed down because there's a lot of centers between like 6K and 8K that average more fantasy points per minute than Ayton. And even if their minutes are volatile, so are Ayton's. So it's kind of like you're taking a risk with Ayton. You can take the same risk with someone else and get more production when they're on the floor. And because salary is not going to be that important tonight, I don't think, because of all the value, it's not going to be that difficult to get from like a 6K Ayton to, someone at 7K or something like that.
Nice. Yeah, Ayton looks like he's been getting bigger minutes recently. I guess part of it is Saric and him have been splitting 48, and he must be out. I mean, he's been playing pretty well, so that makes sense. He's been getting the minutes. Now, Crowder and Bridges look like okay options because they're kind of cheap, but on today's slate, I'm not really seeing much value in going to them. How about yourself?
Yeah, that's where I am too. I mean, you can expect around 32 minutes from Bridges, around 30 from Crowder. These are guys that end up being kind of useful values on smaller slates or slates where there's not an abundance of value. But it's not like either guy's a great per minute fantasy producer. Neither one's like super cheap either. So I think they're pretty much priced where they should be. And this isn't a slate where I think getting to a lot of guys that are priced where they should be is going to be in your best interest.
On the Toronto side, one surprise today is Gary Trent Jr. and Rodney Hood, who got traded to the Raptors for Norman Powell, are both in today, even though that trade was yesterday. So this one moved pretty quick. Now, Trent, he plays the same position as Powell. So I'm kind of wondering, are they going to put Trent in the starting lineup, or do you think they're going to go to like Baines, who wouldn't be a bad choice, versus Aiden? So how do you see the starting lineup shaking out?
My guess is Gary Trent, and the reason is, for one, he's similar enough to Powell, better defender, lower usage guy, but plays the same positions, and he was playing big minutes in Portland, so it's not like there's any sort of conditioning issues or anything like that. The other reason is I think typically maybe you would see them do something like bring Gary Trent off the bench until he has time to practice with the team or whatever, but teams aren't really practicing this year because they don't have time, so that doesn't seem like a logical way to approach it. So my guess is that Trent slides into the starting lineup, but I do think Baines is a possibility. Like you said, they could just move Siakam back to the 4, give Aaron Baines the start, against DeAndre Ayton. That would make Baines a decent value, close to minimum salary if he does start.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see because Baines really hasn't been getting the minutes recently. It's been so wild, the fluctuations recently. So unless we get the news Baines is starting, probably not much here.
It could be Boucher also.
That's true. Yeah. So if Boucher started, I think that would be pretty appealing because we're always worried about the minutes with him. And we know if he's starting, the minutes opportunity will be good. And what about the other Raptors that were confident in the playing time? Lowry, Van Vliet, Anunoby, and Siakam. How much are you prioritizing them today?
I wouldn't say I'm prioritizing them. I think that Siakam, Van Vliet, and Lowry are all reasonable options. They don't really stand out as the top plays at their respective positions and price ranges, I don't think. But Phoenix has been playing at a relatively fast pace over the last month. They are a good defensive team as well. But Siakam, if he does start at center, is a little bit more productive than when he doesn't. Van Vliet and Lowry, we know both guys have massive ceilings. So as long as they're low owned, I think they're okay as contrarian pieces. They should play big minutes here. And, if this game's competitive, you probably get pretty pretty good games out of them. But there's a number of guys that I just like a little bit more.
Agreed. Gorgie Jang waived.
There.
Yeah. All right. Boston, Milwaukee. So Boston tried to make some moves. They traded for Evan Fournier, who he had a pretty good tweet on it. I don't know if you saw, but he's like, in case you don't know me, like Google my last name. So that was some good advice for the Boston fans. Now, he's not playing today, so that the net is just Daniel Tice is removed from the rotation because he got traded. So what do you expect to happen now that Tice is not on the team?
So what we are waiting on word on Mo Wagner and Luke Cornett. They've said Fournier won't be joining the team today, but Wagner and Cornett could be there, which would add some front court depth. But the biggest thing is that I think it solidifies minutes for Robert Williams. Someone in Boston's organization, I think it was Danny Ainge, but I don't remember for sure, said something along the lines of that, basically Robert Williams has earned the minutes and that it's Robert Williams, spot now, basically. He's averaged 1.3 DraftKings points per minute this season. The fantasy production's been great. The issue has been, that he was stuck behind Tristan Thompson and Daniel Tice, at least to some extent. So it was kind of difficult to trust the minutes. But now both of those guys, Tice on a different team, Thompson out tonight. Robert Williams, I assume, starts. If he doesn't, I'd be kind of surprised, especially because Semi Ojeleye is out tonight as well, which doesn't sound like a big deal. But Ojeleye is someone that the Celtics have used to defend Giannis in the past. So like if I'd had to guess who would randomly start over Robert Williams, Semi would have been my guess, but he's also out. So I'm guessing you get a start from Williams. I'm guessing you get at least like 26 or so minutes from him, if not more. And he's pretty cheap. I mean, his salary would come up because he's been playing more minutes in general lately and producing at a really high rate. But he's like the same. He's one of these guys. He's the same price as DeAndre Ayton, more or less. He has similar playing time volatility, and he averages 0.2 of a fantasy point per minute more than Ayton does. So like it just makes it really hard for me to go to Ayton over someone like Robert Williams.
So I agree. Yeah, Robert Williams, particularly on FanDuel, because Robert Williams is a big stocks guy. We have him projected for about 3.5 stocks. So that obviously you get more points for that. So I think he looks pretty nice over there. Now, Kemba, Smart, Brown, and Tatum are pretty much the regulars in Boston. I don't see a ton here today that would make me want to click that button, but how are you feeling about the Boston starters?
Yeah, same boat for me. I kind of feel similarly to the main three Boston guys as I do to the main three Toronto guys. I don't think that they're overpriced. I don't think they're underpriced. I think they play big minutes here because especially like if Wagner and Cornett are out, like Boston's kind of shorthanded here. It doesn't seem it because they didn't give up any of their main pieces, but no Javonte Green, no Daniel Tice. Like I think you get big minutes from Tatum, Brown, Walker, Smart coming off a game where he played like 38 minutes. But at the same time, they are all relatively expensive. And it's just a slate where you're kind of going to get forced into stars and scrubs because the quote unquote scrubs are so good on this particular slate that it's going to, I think, just be difficult to get to a lot of the Boston guys because you're going to just go to like James Harden or Giannis instead.
Agreed. Now, speaking of Giannis, I think he looks pretty appealing here. Normally, Boston isn't a great matchup, but we have the money to spend tonight. They're projected for 121 points. And Giannis is a reasonable price at 10.7K on DraftKings, 11.1K on FanDuel. So as far as the studs today, how are you feeling about Giannis?
Yeah, like I don't love the spot against Boston, but I think the big thing is that, well, it's kind of twofold. For one, all the value, like raw points end up mattering a little bit more. Like it doesn't matter quite as much how well Giannis does point per dollar because you're just going to have an abundance of salary. But also you don't have that many options at the top. You have Harden, who I think clearly looks better than Giannis. But there's not that much. You have Harden, you have Jokic, you have Giannis basically. So it's not like you need Giannis to beat, 5 other guys that produce at a similar rate to him in a relatively difficult matchup. You just need him to be one of the top scorers on the slate. And there's not that many guys that can compete with him on a per minute basis or, minutes per game basis. So I think just sort of by default, you're going to end up getting to a lot of Giannis.
Definitely. It wouldn't even be surprising to maybe have some Giannis and Harden lineups with all the value. What about Middleton, Holiday, and the rest of the Bucks? I think they got a little price bump because Giannis missed that game, but now that he's back, they're not looking so great.
Yeah, I don't see a whole lot there. Like you said, the pricing went up. They obviously lose production when Giannis comes back, so I don't really have much interest there.
Agreed. All right, next game we got Houston at Minnesota. Houston made a big trade. They got rid of Oladipo. In return, they got draft compensation, Avery Bradley and Kelly Olynyk, who aren't playing today. But Oladipo's missed some games recently, and when he was out, we saw some pretty good performances. So the two main guys, Wall and Wood, they are a little bit pricey today for, I think, because of the recent performances, but still look pretty decent in a matchup versus Minnesota, who's one of the weaker teams in the league. So how are you feeling about Wall and Wood?
Yeah, I like both of those guys because it's not going to be that difficult to get to their salaries, and the matchup is really good, like you said. John Wall usage rate without Oladipo and Harden this year, well over 30%, assist percentage over 30%. And one of the things, like as the season goes on, I think you could see John Wall's playing time decrease just because Houston's essentially trying to lose games. But in their most recent game where they got blown out by the Hornets, you actually have John Wall playing pretty far into the fourth quarter, down by almost 30 points. So I don't get the sense that they're pulling the plug on John Wall in any way, shape, or form yet. And that was coming off of two back-to-back where he played like 36 minutes in both games as well. So for now, at least, I'm assuming you're just getting John Wall playing tons of minutes, producing at a high rate. It's not a, it's a good matchup against Minnesota as well. So I really like him. And then Christian Wood definitely stands out as one of the better mid-range centers. I think he's averaged about 1.2 to 1.3 fantasy points per minute this year. He played about 29 minutes in 3/4 of the blowout last game. I'm assuming you get 34 to 36 if this is competitive. And, again, just not a bad matchup against Minnesota. So both of those guys really stand out because they project well for their salaries, I think, but they also just have really high ceilings based on their roles in this offense and the matchup.
I agree. Yeah, I think Wall and Wood look pretty nice today. It's not good to see Wall playing all these minutes after recovering from slipping and falling at home.
Yeah.
So
while recovering from surgery.
Oh man, that was a crazy saga, but long removed at this point, I guess. Sterling Brown got the start last time with no Oladipo. He's been playing pretty big minutes, as well as Tate and House. They don't really jump out at me, but they look like solid options. Any preferences there between those three?
Yeah, I think they're really similar. House, Brown, Kenyon Martin, and Tate, really. I think they don't jump off the page, especially on this slate with the value. But at the same time, they all have either small forward and or power forward eligibility, which is pretty useful on this slate. And they're not really expensive. Sterling Brown, 0.83 fantasy points per minute in the games with Wall and without Oladipo and Harden this year. Kenyon Martin's at about 0.9 fantasy points per minute. House is at around 0.85. Like all these guys Brown and House most likely play like 32 to 34 minutes. Kenyon Martin, I assume, plays around 26, but he's, the best fantasy producer out of the group. They're fine to, kind of like last piece in type guys in your lineups, but I don't feel as strongly towards any of them as I do to guys like Wall and Wood.
On the Minnesota side, I mean, an equally good matchup for the Timberwolves tonight. Karl Anthony Towns has been playing big minutes, and he's got this 10K price tag on both sites that makes him look like he's affordable. So are you going to be playing Towns a lot tonight?
The thing that makes it really, really difficult, and the reason that I would need him to have pretty low ownership for me to want to do it, is he's just so close in salary to Nikola Jokic. And you're talking about, Jokic averages the same or more minutes per game. He averages a lot more fantasy points per minute. As good as Towns has been, he's averaging 1.35 DraftKings points per minute, which is very good. It just doesn't compare to Jokic, who produces like Giannis does. And then also the mid-range and even the value spots at center, there's so much upside there that I'm not really sure how much I would like my lineup if I were to, like on DraftKings, if I were to go Jokic plus Towns. It might be a contrarian build, which is nice, but I'm still not really sure how much I would end up liking it when I'm giving up like all the mid-range upside at center by doing that. So I think it'll be really, really tough to get to him in lineups, not because of his actual salary, just because of him relative to Jokic and also relative to the position. But, if that does force the ownership very low, then I start to become interested because clearly he can go for, 60 points here.
Definitely. Now, something interesting happened last game. Josh Okogie was a late scratch. So we saw McDaniel start at small forward while Vanderbilt started at power forward. Usually those guys rotate at the position. However, Vanderbilt, he picked up 4 fouls, playing only 9 minutes in the first half. As a result, Juan Hernan-Gomez played like 30 minutes. But I'm kind of seeing the opportunity there for Vanderbilt and McDaniels again if they both start. on the other hand, they have McLaughlin, who's poised to come back from COVID. And I mean, playing guys out of position isn't really something we can count on. So what are you expecting here?
Yeah, I mean, if Vanderbilt starts, he's 3,300 on DraftKings and he has power forward eligibility. He's a good enough fantasy point per minute guy. His rates do take a hit when he's playing alongside Towns, but he still produces better than most $3,300 guys do. So in this matchup, you know, especially in tournaments where people are going to go to the low point per minute Orlando guys because the minutes are locked in, Vanderbilt's the kind of guy that I do like taking a shot on, because if he does play, you know, more minutes than we're expecting, he's going to do stuff with those minutes. But, you know, we've seen a ton of starts from Vanderbilt this year where he just doesn't play that many minutes. You know, normally, like you said, it's McDaniels taking the minutes from him, but it could also be Jake Layman. McLaughlin could be back. It could be Hernan Gomez taking minutes. You know, it's Culver could take minutes. Like, there's a lot of ways where Vanderbilt starts and still ends up having a bad game.
Agreed. Especially, I mean, if McDaniels starts, that doesn't mean that they can't just keep McDaniels at power forward and rotate in Culver or someone else. So I do think Vanderbilt might go under the radar today. He doesn't look bad at that price. Okay, so guys, if you like listening to shows in podcast form, we got you covered with our podcast network. Go to awesemo.com/podcast, and we have a weekly giveaway where we give out a free week of Awesemo Plus. All you have to do is leave a 5-star review to be eligible for that. We have all the non-live before locks shows and podcasts. Also, MLB Day is next week, starting next Thursday. And of course, we got you covered with all the MLB content you need. We have a special deal where you can get the first 9 days of MLB for $9 with the promo code starting9 with the number 9. So we got projections, ownership, top stacks, adding a boom bust tool today this year, lineup builder, and we got Slack. So make sure to use that promo code starting9 for $9 for 9 days. All right, Miami at Charlotte. So Miami made some moves. They traded Kelly Olynyk, who had been starting, and Avery Bradley, who had been out for a while. But as a result, maybe a little bit of reduced rotation today. Butler is questionable. Obviously, that's going to be some key injury news to look out for. So how are you handling the Heat?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge injury news, because if Butler is in, he looks like a really good option here, because small forward's not that good of a position. You're going to have salary to spend. He's been really good this year. The matchup against Charlotte's good. He's not really that expensive, you know, $9K on DraftKings, $9,300 on FanDuel. So Butler, I think, looks good if he's in. If he's out, though, it takes Bam Adebayo from being a good play to an even better play. In the games that Bam has played without Butler this year, his average production actually is about the same on a per minute basis, 1.29 to 1.27 DraftKings points per minute. But his usage rate is much higher. His assist percentage is much higher in the games that Butler is out. So it suggests that at the very least, Adebayo has a much higher ceiling when Butler doesn't play. And also that over more games, you could potentially just see that gap widen on his average production as well. So he looks like the best mid-range. Bam looks like the best mid-range center if Butler is out. If Butler is in, he's still in that mix, but I think it becomes a lot closer between like him and Christian Wood, for example.
Definitely. We saw it last night where Bam was pretty good with Butler out. It just improves in every category. This game is an hour after a lock. So one thing you could do, you could boost Bam's projection a little bit to make sure you have it, or just late swap to him if Butler is ruled out. Now, the other key guy that's out is Dragic. With Dragic out, we have Nunn and we have Hero at point guard, and Nunn had a big day yesterday. So I'm kind of looking at him as a decent option today, although there are a lot of good options in the range. So how are you handling Nunn?
If Butler's in, I'm not that interested in Nunn. Like, you could still use him in tournaments. Same goes for Hero, but I wouldn't have that much confidence, because they would still have the ability. Like, they still have enough bodies where if Nunn's not playing really well, he could lose some minutes. Even if he's playing reasonably well, he could lose some minutes. Like, they could just not close with him. We'd seen that before with Dragic out. But if Butler's out, then Nunn gets more usage. His minutes become more solidified. Same goes for Tyler Hero. And you even had Gabe Vincent start and play like 26 minutes without Butler yesterday. So everything just really revolves around Jimmy Butler here for me.
Agreed. Now, one popular value play from the other night was Ariza. He did get the minutes. not traditionally a guy that we love in fantasy because he's not a great point per minute producer, but the opportunity seems potentially there. So what are you doing with him if Butler's in and if he's out?
Pretty comfortably ignoring him, I think, if Butler is in. If Butler is out, I think he's a good value, especially on DraftKings. You know, he's 3,400. He played 33 minutes last night. Almost anybody playing 30 to 33 minutes at almost minimum salary is going to be a pretty good option. And Ariza, you know, he's not a great fantasy producer, but he's also not bad. Over the last 3 years, he's 3/4 of a fantasy point per minute. You know, when you're talking about this salary on DraftKings, that's perfectly fine for if he's getting the start and if he's, you know, expected to play 30 plus minutes again. But, you know, if Butler's in, I think it muddies the water enough in terms of minutes and also most likely takes some production away from Ariza to where I downgrade him for sure.
Yeah, that's good to pay attention to, where a reason might not be as safe if Butler plays. On Charlotte, obviously Ball continues to be out in his absence. Graham has rejoined the starting lineup. He's been playing decent minutes, but nothing too amazing. And then the last game, Bismack Biyombo started, so I'm kind of wondering, like, when will someone else get the start instead? So what are you expecting here?
Yeah, I mean, for now, I'm just expecting they go with that same lineup. I don't think it has a huge DFS impact anyway, especially if it's Zeller replacing Biyombo. Like, you know, you could take shots on Zeller, but we know that even when he starts, his playing time can be hit or miss. Like, the biggest way that it would have a DFS impact is if they were to go with PJ Washington at center. And because we know that bumps PJ Washington's production, and it would also open up more minutes for guys like Malik Monk and Miles Bridges. But assuming that PJ Washington starts at the 4, I don't really care too much who's starting between Zeller and Biyombo from a DFS standpoint.
Stroh's fan in chat. Apparently he's not the biggest PJ fan. He says he can get 45 minutes and get less than 10. So I'm thinking maybe he's got PJ Washington confused with PJ Tucker, because PJ Washington's not bad. He's got this appealing price on FanDuel at 6K. So I'm kind of feeling him there regardless of if he starts as center or power forward. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a good enough price tag, because if this game's close, you should get a lot of minutes from PJ Washington. I do certainly prefer him if he were to start at center, but either way, like, he's cheap enough there. Looking at their rotation last game, it is kind of disappointing, like, because they went full out, basically, Biyombo and Zeller. They didn't play 48 minutes, but they played a lot of minutes. Washington's production, like, he goes from 0.85 to like 1.2 DraftKings points per minute when he's playing center instead of power forward. So it makes a huge, huge difference. But, you know, he still played like 28 and a half minutes in 3/4 of that game. You could potentially get 35 minutes from him at 6K on FanDuel. So I'd still be fine with it if he's a power forward. I would just like it more if he were to start at center.
On the in the next game here, I think this one is a big one. Portland at Orlando. On the Portland side, we have Lillard out. So and they also made some moves. They traded Rodney Hood and Gary Trent for Norman Powell. Powell potentially could play today, given that Trent and Hood are. So we'll have to look out for that news. Now, Nurkic is back today, and he had a wrist issue that kept him out for a long time. So it's going to be hard to predict the minutes here between Nurkic and Kanter. I do remember last year in the bubble, Nurkic came back, and all of a sudden he's playing like 30 minutes from game 1. So that's kind of burned in my memory. What do you think is going to happen this time?
Yeah, I mean, my best guess is that you get some sort of like 24, 24, 25, 23 split between the two, something like that. Enough to, like, I think that's likely enough that outside of the largest field tournaments, I don't really want to take a shot on Nurkic. But you certainly can in those, because, like, he's only 5,100 on DraftKings. If he did play 30 or 32 minutes, he probably wins the tournament. So the upside is there if he gets the minutes. But I think the most likely case is that you get close to an even split between the two of them.
I think that's a reasonable prediction there. Now, with the Lillard out, Ryan just sent me a DM, Rinpack. He says Nurkic had a calf strain as well that he's recovering from. So that's some good insight that maybe he will be eased in a little bit more. So, Ryan, thanks for the heads up there. Now, with the Lillard out, we got a spot in the starting lineup, and obviously Gary Trent not being in Portland anymore isn't going to get the starts. So who are you looking at as potentially starting?
Yeah, so my guess is that you get so Nurkic or Kanter, Covington, Jones, Powell, if he plays, and McCollum. If Powell's out, I would guess that Anthony Simons most likely gets the start in his place. They could do something like Nasir Little and slide everyone off a spot. But I think the most likely would be Anthony Simons if Powell's out.
So obviously with Lillard out, McCollum is pretty close to a lock, I would say, just because he's priced at 7,700 on DraftKings, 7,500 on FanDuel. Just a lot more opportunity to take shots and get assists. So do you agree that CJ is a top play today?
Yeah, I mean, it's he's averaged 1.5 fantasy points per minute since last year in the games he's played without Lillard. He's been playing better this year in general than he did last year. And then also, Orlando kind of has a reputation for being like a good defensive team, but this is not the actual Orlando team. This is like 8 guys that barely play. Obviously no Jonathan Isaac, no Aaron Gordon. It's not. I'd be shocked if this is a good defensive team. So it all sets up as a really, really, really good spot for CJ McCollum.
You don't think Bamba's going to be able to stop him?
Yeah, I'm not a big Bamba guy. I don't think that Chasing Randall's going to do a whole lot to slow down either.
All right, so if Powell starts, who are you going to be looking at on Portland, if anyone, for fantasy?
If Powell starts, it's mostly CJ McCollum for me. I still think you could look to Anthony Simons at 3,700, but I know Spags mentioned it on the previous show, and I agreed with him. If ownership's coming in really high on him, I don't think he's the kind of guy that you have to just plug into your lineup. In the games that he has played without Lillard and with McCollum since last year, he's only averaged 0.67 DraftKings points per minute. So it's not like he's been a very productive player. And if Powell is in, there's more minutes available for Simons, but it's not like he has to go out there and play 35 minutes or something like that. I think it would be more likely that you get mid-20s from him. I think he's a good point per dollar play, but there's a lot of those on this slate. So if Norman Powell's available and Simons is coming off the bench, I certainly don't think he's the kind of guy you have to go to at high ownership.
Oh, yeah. So if Simons does start and Powell's out, though, would that make him a priority?
It would make me feel better just because I think you would have to get more minutes. Like if you take the minutes that I'm expecting Norman Powell to play, you take those out of the lineup. Now you're missing Lillard and essentially you're missing Gary Trent and Rodney Hood. So, that would make it so I think there's a better chance that you just end up getting 30 plus minutes from Simons. And at 3,700, then you're getting into a situation where it's like how, he might not have the biggest game, but how likely is he to actually not be helpful if he's going to play 30 plus minutes?
Nice. So keep an eye out for the starting lineup for that one. If you have Simons, Powell, it's not really clear since he's questionable if he will play or not. So that'll be some big news.
Yeah, one thing I did see, which makes me lean towards Powell being in. So obviously Trent and Hood playing means that the trade has gone through and all that's good. One of the Blazers reporters earlier in the day tweeted that Powell may or may not play depending on logistics, but that Powell was expected to be at the game. So the fact he's expected to be at the game and that the other pieces of the trade are playing make me think he's going to end up playing.
What is the logistical issue then? So
right.
I guess if he's there, he'll play. Now on the Orlando side, so they traded Fournier, Gordon, Vucevic, and Aminu. They're 4 starters. So Terrence Ross also is out for this game, and Cole Anthony and Markelle Fultz are still out, obviously. So the guys we got here are Karim Mane, James Ennis, Okiki, Birch, Bamba, Bacon, Randall, and Michael Carter-Williams. So we only got 8 guys, the minimum. And these guys aren't expensive. So I'm kind of thinking maybe Bacon is a nice play because I remember back on Charlotte, he would be jacking up a ton of shots. I know he's got it in him, even though his usage this year isn't super high. Who are you looking at on Orlando?
Yeah, I'm with you on Dwayne Bacon because even though the usage isn't high, like you said, if you look at the 8 players that are available, he has the highest usage rate other than Michael Carter-Williams this year. And so, I mean, someone has to take the shots. Dwayne Bacon is certainly someone that'll step up and do it. It's not like the thing for me is it's not even like you have these guys, like the end of the bench guys that are stepping into the rotation. They're not those guys that have like gone out there and in garbage time, they've been chucking up, 15 shots, as quickly as they can. None of them shoot, Dwayne Bacon does. And so I do think that you get a bump for him. He's played, the numbers are in the deep dive article. I'm pulling them up now, but he's played like he's played 210 minutes this year without Vooch, Fournier, or Aaron Gordon on the floor. He has a 26.3% usage rate. So that's in line with what, our expectation was, that when he's out there without anyone else that's willing to shoot, he is going to chuck up shots.
Yeah, I agree. So Bacon at 4,800 DraftKings and 4,700 on FanDuel looks pretty appealing. Now, the rest of the lineup is going to be a little bit tough to predict. So let's start with a starting lineup. I think we get MCW, Bacon, and then I'm thinking maybe Okiki, Ennis, and Birch. Although, Birch usually plays at power forward, I would say. So I'm not sure if Bamba is going to get the start and Birch is going to be in the starting lineup as well. But we haven't seen anything like this. So what are you thinking?
Yeah, I'm confident that Carter Williams and Bacon start. James Ennis probably starts. And then, it's probably two of Okiki, Birch, and Bamba. I think that, they all end up playing reasonable minutes. The thing that is interesting is that Birch is actually a good fantasy producer. He's over 0.9 fantasy points per minute without those guys on the floor this year. Bamba is a good fantasy producer. So if you were to get a starting lineup that has Birch and Bamba, you would feel a little bit better about both of their minutes. It would make them both look a little bit better. If only one of them starting, I would prefer whichever one is starting because I would feel better about their minutes. Okiki is not someone I feel very confident in because his salary came up. Even if he starts, I think there's a good chance he plays 30 plus minutes, but he's been very unproductive this year, both in terms of his actual production, fantasy wise, and he just hasn't been a high usage guy, even in situations where, other high usage guys haven't been on the floor. He's not one of these guys that's taken a step forward. So I'd put Okiki behind Birch and behind Bamba in terms of guys that I want to play. So I'm kind of hoping that, Birch and or Bamba start.
Yeah, Bamba has been like a good fantasy producer this year, so that's intriguing. I don't love the fact that they traded for Wendell Carter, because obviously that shows Bamba probably isn't their center of the future. Yeah. They hoped when they drafted him at the 6th spot, but if he gets the minutes, he's going to be really good. So that will be just a question of if he gets the minutes. Now, when the
most minutes he's played in a game in his entire career is 26. So I'm not going to get too excited about his playing time. But if he starts, I would think that there's a good chance you're getting, mid-20s.
Yeah, if he starts, I think he's going to be a really good play. If he comes off the bench, I think maybe a wild card that could have a lot of upsides. So once we get the starting lineup, are you going to swap off anyone that's not in it?
Most likely, yeah, just because I think it'll be it's an 8:00 game. So I think I'm still going to have a lot of room to maneuver because, especially playing one lineup, I'll have Harden. I might have Giannis. I might have Robert Williams, but I don't think I'm gonna have a ton from those first 3 games. So I'm gonna have a lot of room to move, and it's gonna make it pretty easy to downgrade guys from Orlando that are not starting, I think.
Good. Now, next game, Denver at New Orleans. Denver made a move. They traded Gary Harris and RJ Hampton, and they got Aaron Gordon. So that was a nice pickup for this year. He's not playing today. So the net is that, RJ Hampton's out. So that doesn't really make any difference. So, Jokic is a great play every single day. Matchup versus New Orleans certainly isn't going to dissuade anyone from playing him. How much are you going to go to him over the other top price guys?
Yeah, I love Jokic here. I think it's a good matchup. He's obviously great. The only negative thing I could say about Jokic is that center, I think, is very clearly the deepest position on this slate. So from an upside standpoint, you might get a little bit higher ceiling by going to some combination, Harden and or Giannis, and then saving a little bit of money at center. But outside of that, I don't have anything negative to say here. It's Jokic produces at about the same fantasy points per minute as Giannis does. He averages about the same, if not more, minutes per game. I think he has Giannis by about a minute or 2 this season. And New Orleans, is one of the faster teams in the league and one of the least efficient defenses. So I do love Jokic here. And even, people might say Steven Adams is a solid defender, but Jokic is the kind of guy where it doesn't really matter because he can pull Adams away from the basket. He's a great passer. He does everything so well that I really don't care if one individual guy on the Pelicans is a good defender.
Fair enough. Now, what about the rest of the Nuggets? Obviously, since not much has changed, maybe they aren't a top team to target today.
Yeah, I don't see a whole lot else that stands out. Jamal Murray, Michael Porter, Will Barton, all these guys have reasonable ceilings, but this isn't a slate where they really stand out to me. I think there's some slates where $3,200 JaMychal Green would be kind of appealing, but again, it's just I guess it's kind of like Jared Vanderbilt. Like if JaMychal Green had a really good game at $3,200, it wouldn't surprise me, but I still just see a lot more ways that he doesn't help you than that he ends up helping.
Definitely. Now on the New Orleans side, they kept Lonzo Ball, which was a little bit of a surprise, but he's out for the next 2 games. We just got some news here. Bobby Portis is out today, so I don't see that being necessarily too big a move. But do you think that makes Brook Lopez maybe more appealing?
I think it makes Brook Lopez more appealing because PJ Tucker is also out, but I'm not sure it makes Brook Lopez like that much more appealing that I would be prioritizing him on this slate still, because he just doesn't produce at that high of a rate, and there's so many centers that you can go to.
Yeah, I think he might just be kind of in the mix now, where before he wasn't really at all. Now, going back to New Orleans, Nickeil Alexander-Walker has been the guy we've been targeting because he's been starting in Ball's place. He has pretty high usage, and he's delivered for us 5,300 on DraftKings and FanDuel today. So are you going back to the well?
Yeah, I think he's a good play. It's not a great matchup against Denver, but he has averaged 30 minutes per game in the 5 games he started without Lonzo this year. The one thing that concerns me, and he's been productive in those games, averaging over a fantasy point per minute. The thing that concerns me is even though he's starting for the point guard in Lonzo, he's been very scoring dependent in those games. He's got like a 12% assist percentage. And it makes sense because, when you think about New Orleans, you have Bledsoe gets assists to some extent, Ingram gets assists, Zion gets assists. It's just a team where everyone kind of does that. So you don't need Alexander Walker to soak up all of Lonzo's assists. So he does, he's expensive enough now where you can see how he kind of disappoints at that salary since he is scoring dependent. But if I think also my interest in him will kind of depend on Jimmy Butler, because like if Jimmy Butler's out, I think have more interest in going to someone like Tyler Hero or Kendrick Nunn. Whereas if Butler's in, obviously I'm moving Alexander Walker ahead of those guys.
Yeah, I think that will be key for figuring out what to do at the guard spot. So Alexander Walker, regardless, looks like a pretty good option. What about the other Pelicans? Zion has been having some big fantasy performances recently, but I feel like our miles a little bit lower on him, and I can't really find any stats that suggest he should be better now than he has over the whole season. So I'm kind of off of him today. But is there something I'm missing here?
I mean, I've been on him recently just because we've seen an uptick in usage and in potential assists, and this, that's translated into assist percentage. But it's not like a massive thing. Like his usage, I think for the season's around 28%. Over the last month or so, it's up around 30. Assist percentage is up a few points. So like I think he's a better option now than he has been previously. But I also don't think that it's some massive change to where you should just be like slamming him in the lineups every single slate. And I think he's a good tournament play on this slate, but I also think it'll be difficult to prioritize him because the matchup against Denver is not great, and because there are just so many good plays here. So if I get to some Zion, that's fine, but this isn't one of those slates. Like there have been a couple of slates recently where Zion was low owned and he was like someone I loved. This isn't one of those, just I think there's so many options and I don't love the matchup here.
Yeah, I don't think the price is great either at 8,700. So he has been having an amazing year though, so I'm pretty bullish on his top shots. I'll tell you that.
I think there's been 5 or 6 sold for like 20K in the last like 48 hours.
That's wild. Now, what about Ingram, Bledsoe, and Adams? Decent fantasy options normally, but nothing standing out to me tonight.
Yeah, I mean, Ingram's a little more expensive than I would like. He has a very high ceiling, about a 30% usage rate, gets 21-22% assist percentage as well, but he's priced up. Eric Bledsoe's salary is very appealing. Eric Bledsoe's production is not. He hasn't been that great this year in general, and I think part of that is just the team that he's on, playing with so many other good rebounders, so many other guys to get assists. But in particular, recently, he's been terrible. Over the last month, he's got a 15.5% usage rate. He's averaging like 0.7 fantasy points per minute. It wouldn't be surprising if Eric Bledsoe just happens to have a good game at 4,400. Like he's still talented and he's got a very long history of being a good per minute producer. But I just can't with any confidence say that I really like him here, even at the cheap price tag, because there's just so many mouths to feed still on New Orleans, and he's just been playing so bad.
Definitely. Next game we got Indianapolis at Dallas, or Indiana, I mean. So they've been a pretty good team. They got some nice young stars with Sabonis, LeVert, Brogdon, but tonight might not be the night because they got a fully healthy squad. So are you getting to any Pacers tonight?
Yeah, I mean, they're another one of these teams where I think the big three are all okay. Domantas Sabonis' salary isn't crazy high, but it's not really, I wouldn't say he's underpriced. Caris LeVert is a little more expensive than I would like, but he's played well recently. Malcolm Brogdon sort of in the same boat. None of them stand out. Dallas has also been the slowest team in the league over the last month, I believe. If not the slowest, they're definitely close to the top. So it's not a super appealing matchup. It's a team that more or less is fully healthy. So it's more of like last guy in contrarian plays that have high ceilings, I think, than guys who I'm building around.
Agreed. Yeah. I like the players, but today it doesn't seem like there's a great opportunity here.
Yeah.
Now on the Dallas side with Luka out, I think there's a lot of value. The number one guy I look to usually when Luka's out is Jalen Brunson, who usually gets the start and plays some big minutes. And today looks like no exception because he's 4,500 on DraftKings and 4,800 on FanDuel. So is Brunson one of your top priorities today?
Yeah, assuming he's starting, without a doubt. He's just a lot, like he gets a lot more minutes when Luke is out. Typically, you can normally get like 34, 35 minutes from Brunson. He's a productive enough player. He's cheap. Indiana has been playing at a top 10 pace over the last month. They've also not been very good defensively. I think Brunson's clearly one of the best values tonight.
Agreed. Yeah, I think I might have 100% to be honest, even though there are some good other values on the slate. I mean, one other guy on the Mavs, I mean, there's several we can go to here, but Porzingis, I feel like he doesn't typically get a huge usage bump with Luka out, but nonetheless, he's still looking pretty decent today. So how are you handling him?
Yeah, I really like Porzingis. He's played 11 games since last year without Luka, and the usage rate's at 29.4%. So I mean, it's a bump, but it's not like it's crazy. But the rebounding percentage also gets up to nearly 18%, which makes sense because Luka's a good rebounder as well. He's averaged almost 34 minutes per game, 1.52 DraftKings points per minute over those 11 games. So for someone that is very clearly priced for Luka to be in, I think Porzingis stands out as a very good play here, especially he's 7,500 on FanDuel, I believe.
Agreed. Yeah, I think on FanDuel he looks particularly compelling. Like you said, some other guys that I'm looking at, I mean, Maxi Kleber is pretty popular, particularly on FanDuel at 3,800. Dorian Finney-Smith on FanDuel is 3,900, and then Josh Richardson on both sites is a little bit over 5K. So these guys all look like pretty decent options. How are you feeling about the other Dallas guys today?
Yeah, I mean, the price for Maxi on FanDuel is just clearly too low. He doesn't produce at a really high rate, regardless of Luka. He's at 0.75 fantasy points per minute in those games over the last couple of years, but he's averaging about 30 minutes per game over the last month. And against this Indiana front court of Miles Turner and Domantas Sabonis, it's not going to be difficult at all for Porzingis and Kleber to play a lot of minutes alongside each other. So I think he's a good value. Especially on FanDuel. I think Finney-Smith's fine. Richardson's fine. Tim Hardaway's priced up a little bit higher than I expected him to be. He's been close to a fantasy point per minute guy in games without Luka and with Porzingis since last year. But at his salary, I think more of a secondary play as well. And then the same can be said for Trey Burke, who is flat minimum on DraftKings, but also it's been made pretty clear by Rick Carlisle this season that he just doesn't want to play Trey Burke any more than he has to.
Fair enough. Yeah, I was going to ask you about Burke because at 3K, he looks like one of those mid-price guys that maybe we can go to.
Yeah, 3 games without Luka this year. He's played 17, 22, and 19 minutes.
Definitely. Yeah, it's been a little frustrating, but he's not a bad per minute producer. So it's just on this slate, maybe not a required value piece. Guys, of course, we have a ton of breaking news every day in the NBA, so make sure to follow us at Awesemo NBA on Twitter. We got a news guide on there tweeting out all the breaking news, and also make sure to jump on Slack because he's in the Breaking NBA News channel, tweeting out all the important stuff. That's a little bit better than Twitter notifications because you can get that little buzz in your pocket to let you know, like, this is an urgent piece of news where you might have to change your lineups as opposed to just you run of the mill starting lineups and stuff. So that's really handy on Slack. Also, we got the Sweet 16 this weekend, and we got you covered. Ben and Matt have been doing a ton of shows, articles. We got picks for sports betting and DFS. You can get the rest of March Madness for $9.95 on our site. And also, if you want to get the best odds, go to oddshopper.awesemo.com. We got all those major U.S. sports books with all the lines. So you can just win more money if you bet a better line. So that's always a priority. All right, we got 3 more games. Memphis at Utah is our first one. I mean, Gorgie Jang, that really changed the whole slate being released. But besides that, not a lot from the Memphis Grizzlies as far as moves at the roster or at the trade deadline. So I'm not seeing a ton here. What are you seeing in Memphis?
Sort of forgot they were playing tonight. Tough matchup with Utah. Fully, basically fully healthy team. Ja Morant, Jonas Valanciunas, they can score a lot of points, but they're not towards the top of any list for me, really.
Definitely, yeah. I think we can just skip Memphis entirely, to be honest. But Ja Morant, obviously high upside. Kyle Anderson, reasonable price. On the Utah side, another team, I don't think they made any moves at the deadline, so they stood pat, and can't blame them. They've been fantastic this year. However, for fantasy tonight, the pricing isn't particularly favorable. So how are you handling the Jazz?
Probably not rostering them much. I mean, you can certainly make a case for Rudy Gobert. You can make a case for Donovan Mitchell or Mike Conley. The thing is just like, I think I can make a better case for Christian Wood or Bam Adebayo than Gobert. I think I can make a better case for CJ McCollum than Donovan Mitchell. There's, just a lot of guys that are very clearly very, very, very good plays on this slate. And I don't think any of the Utah guys have anything in particular that makes them stand out here as opposed to on any other slate, really.
Agreed. One guy I might look at is Mike Conley. He's only 5,800 on FanDuel. That seems a little bit low for an all-star caliber player. So, I mean, that's one idea, but like on today's slate, not really a huge priority. Let's go to Atlanta at Golden State. Atlanta, another team that they're kind of expected to make some moves, maybe John Collins, but they decided to hang on to him to try to make a run at the playoffs this year. As a result, it doesn't look like there's a ton of value on Atlanta today. So what are you seeing here?
Yeah, I mean, the only real move was Rajon Rondo for Lou Williams, but that doesn't matter that Lou Williams isn't in yet. DeAndre Hunter's questionable, potentially could open up some more minutes for, Bogdanovich, but it's not a team that I really love. I do think that looking to Trae Young or Clint Capella in tournaments in particular is kind of appealing because Golden State had, they played a top 5 pace over the last month. We did just get news that Draymond Green's not on the injury report. That should make Golden State's defense better, but still you're getting a nice big pace up spot for Atlanta. Trae Young kind of just comes in it like an awkward price point where he's more expensive than John Wall. He's not quite as expensive as Harden. So I think that you might see him not really get into lineups that easily. And he's someone that, maybe is a contrarian piece in tournaments that has a really high ceiling. Same goes for Capella, who has only averaged 27 minutes per game since the coaching change, but he played about 30 minutes last game. He's averaged nearly 1.4 fantasy points per minute this year. If you happen to get lucky and he plays 30 or 31 minutes, he should pretty easily outperform his salary. So he's someone where like if everyone's going to Christian Wood, for example, I think Capella gives you a similar range of outcomes to Wood.
Yeah, Capella has been having some big games recently, so that's been pretty nice. He's kind of priced up today, but I like it. Now, Trae Young with Rajon Rondo off the team. Rondo missed last game, and I was a little bit surprised because I thought Brandon Goodwin would come in and play the backup point guard minutes, but didn't play him at all. So as a result, Trae Young saw 38 minutes, which was well above his average. So I'm wondering, do you think that minutes bump is something that we should expect, or was that just an anomaly?
I wouldn't say expect as in like, I don't think you should project him for almost 39 minutes, but I think that it's obviously in the range of outcomes, and it's more likely to happen tonight than if Rondo were in or Williams were in, or, had Goodwin played that game. So, whereas Young for the season has averaged about 34 minutes per game, and since the coaching change, he's at about 33 and a half. Normally you're kind of rostering him and hoping he gets like 35 minutes. I think that there is a chance he gets another 38 tonight.
Nice. Now, one interesting spot, I don't think this is hugely pivotal for fantasy, but Hunter has been working his way back from injury. In the last game, he played 26 minutes. So I feel like there's a pretty decent chance maybe he takes his starting spot back from Tony Snell today. He's been one of the guys I feel like has been having a better sophomore year than most, kind of making a big step in his second year. But 5,200 DraftKings is 5,400 given the uncertainty in minutes. I'm not sure I'm getting there tonight. How are you feeling about Hunter?
Yeah, he also got the midday downgrade to from probable to questionable.
Okay.
I think I'm double checking it now, but I think I saw that earlier. Now I can't find the Hawks. Yeah, he's questionable now. He was probable earlier. So, some chance he doesn't play, but I do agree the minutes trending up is nice. Just not really a slate where I think I'd prioritize him. The same really can be said. I mean, Bogdan Bogdanovic played 31 minutes last game. Gallinari's, consistently playing 26 to 28, but like all of these guys just sort of look like secondary or tertiary options on the slate, I think.
Fair enough. Yeah, I was going to ask you about Bogdanovic because he's been getting the minutes. But on today's slate, maybe a night slate option.
Yeah.
Now on the Golden State side, as you mentioned, Draymond's in today. Curry remains out and Wanamaker is out. So we've been seeing Jordan Poole get a ton of minutes. He really made some big improvements over the G League season, and now he's carved out a nice role on the Warriors with Curry out. So his price has gone up to 6,500 on DraftKings and 6,200 on FanDuel. That's the point where I'm kind of like, okay, maybe not tonight. What do you think?
Yeah, it's more than I want to pay. Like, I think he's still decent just because, he's not afraid to shoot. But he's averaged in the games he started without Curry, he's at 0.93 DraftKings points per minute. Even if you assume in a competitive game he's playing like 36 minutes, he's at a price point now where he actually has to play better than average. He has to get that full run, then he has to play better than average. And you're talking about an Atlanta team that's top 5 in defensive rating and bottom 5 in pace since Nate McMillan took over. So it's not like the same Atlanta team from last year or 2 years ago where they were one of the best matchups in DFS. I think it's one of the least appealing, and you're getting a rising price at the same time on Jordan Poole.
Agreed. Yeah. So a guy that's been making some improvements, but the price is caught up at this point. Now, some other guys that we were looking out for to get maybe a bump with Curry out. I mean, the usuals, Wiggins, Oubre, and Green, as well as Wiseman, who I feel like he's got this reputation as kind of like a point center, but he doesn't really get assists. So I'm a little bit perplexed by that narrative. But what are you seeing in this Warriors team tonight?
Yeah, I mean, not a whole lot here. Like, you obviously get a really high ceiling from Andrew Wiggins. The usage rate's up around 27% without Curry, but also don't read too much into his production. He's shot 50% from three so far in the games without Steph Curry. He's a 39% three-point shooter overall this year. So, Curry being out isn't making him a better three-point shooter. It's a coincidence, why he's been having those monster games. But Curry being out does give him the opportunity at least to get up more shots, but still purely just a tournament option, I think. Same really for Oubre. I like the salary on James Wiseman. He played 27 minutes in a blowout 2 games ago. He played 29 minutes last night, played through garbage time, was absolutely awful against the Kings, but played 29 minutes, and he's a fantasy point per minute guy. I think that he is underpriced. I just don't know that he's as underpriced as the other underpriced guys on this slate.
Yeah, I think at 4,200 on FanDuel, especially, he stands out. So I think Wiseman's a pretty good play on any site. It's centers you only get a 1 on FanDuel and max of 2 on DraftKings. So I think he's in the mix there. Now, is there any other Warrior you'd look at?
No.
Okay. Cleveland at Lakers is our last game here. So we got a big piece of news lingering where Colin Sexton is questionable. Since this is the last game of the night, I think it's safe to assume we won't really know one way or the other at lock. So what are you going to do here?
I'm not too concerned about it. Like, if Sexton's out, it benefits guys. Like, you can get more minutes for Chetty, but that's not even a guarantee, as we saw last game. It benefits Darius Garland. But on this particular slate, I don't think if Sexton's out, it makes any one guy someone where like you're in trouble if you don't have them. So I think that like the risk reward of like not playing guys from earlier games because you want this news. I think it's a lot better to just like play the good plays that we know are good plays as opposed to waiting to see what happens here.
Yeah, I agree. There isn't too much in the late games to hold out for. So one move the Cavs did make is they shipped off JaVale McGee for Isaiah Hartenstein and some picks. Now, Hartenstein is not playing tonight, so that result is you're moving JaVale from the rotation. Do you expect that to impact anyone?
I think it maybe you see more minutes from Jared Allen, kind of like we talked about with Trae Young. Last game, McGee didn't play, and you got like 34.5 minutes from Allen. That's not drastically different than he's been playing in general, but not having an actual backup center always makes the ceiling a little bit higher, I think. But still, he's expensive enough, especially on DraftKings at 7,900, and then FanDuel he's cheaper, but you can only roster one. He still doesn't really stand out to me, but I like him a little bit more, I guess, since McGee's not there.
Agreed. I think on FanDuel he's pretty appealing at 6,700. Now, Osman was really popular the other night. He got the start because Sexton was out. I assume if Sexton plays, we're not going to him. But if Sexton is out, would you take any shots there?
You can if you still have a roster spot open, but like even if you assume Sexton is out, I don't think Chetty's a good enough play that I would be saving a roster spot for him. Like he only played 21.5 minutes in that game despite starting. He wasn't in foul trouble or anything. He just played awful. He took I think at one point he had as many field goal attempts as fantasy points. Like he's not very good. And there's a lot of guys that they can go to, to take minutes away from him. So I think you would he's going to play on average probably like 28 minutes if he starts, but 28 minutes of Chetty Osman just isn't good enough for me to want to be going out of my way to keep a spot open for him or to be late swapping to him.
Agreed. I see a ton of chat about Time Lord. Who is Time Lord?
Robert Williams.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense because Robert Williams is kind of interesting today. So maybe worth some hype, but the price is high too. Now on the Lakers side, we have LeBron out. AD is out. We've been seeing Kuzma play a ton of minutes, Schroeder as well. And then at the center spot, Damian Jones is no longer at the team. So we saw Devontae Kaycock get a start, but he didn't play in the last game. So I guess Markieff started at center.
Marc Gasol.
Oh, sorry. Marc Gasol's back. My bad. So he's coming off COVID. So maybe he's working his way back to that 20 minutes a game slowly. So are there any priorities for you on the Lakers?
I don't think priorities, but there are a couple of spots that I'm interested in. Kyle Kuzma, I think he's priced up, but on FanDuel where you have to roster two small forwards, I think he's a decent option. He's playing huge minutes. He's averaging about 1.1 fantasy points per minute in games without LeBron and Davis. So I still think he's a pretty good small forward option. I think Schroeder playing big minutes as well and averaging over a fantasy point per minute offers, a little bit of value. And then Harrell is still a decent tournament option, played another 33 minutes last game, wasn't very good, but did come on, towards the end of that game. And overall, he's been very productive without Anthony Davis this year. So all three of those guys, I think, are fine, but there's just, guys that I think look a little bit better if we're talking about, priorities as far as first guys I would put in.
Yeah, this one is it's tough to find some real smash plays. Because of the pricing, like Kuzma at 7,600. I like the concept of Kuzma without LeBron and AD, but that price tag's high. The Cavs aren't a great matchup as far as pace. It's interesting to note they were talking about shipping KCP, but he's still with the team at this point. And then Taylor Horton-Tucker was the guy they didn't want to trade. And I can't understand why, because they don't play him that much. So what did he make of their trade deadline?
Yeah, I mean, they basically just stood pat. I think Horton-Tucker has the potential to be good. Yeah, I don't know. They're gonna go as far as LeBron and Davis take them, really, regardless of what they add or don't. Plus, they're gonna be a popular buyout destination for people.
Definitely. Yeah. I saw people were speculating maybe some Drummond in LA, but then he's linked to another team. I can't remember off the top of my head.
I've seen Boston rumors. I've seen Lakers rumors. I think there was a third team too that I forgot about.
It's always fun seeing what these bought out guys do. So that will be interesting to see coming up here.
The answer is normally they go and play with LeBron James.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah. So maybe we'll get some Drummond. I think I've always wanted to see Drummond on a team where like they throw up a ton of bricks so he can get the board. But the Lakers, I don't know if it's a great fit from that perspective. I always want to see him play with Carmelo.
That's a good. I mean, the Detroit Pistons kind of fit that mold.
That's a good point. Yeah, he was pretty good on there for a while.
And the Cavs.
Anyway, we got a new member, Eric. So thanks for subscribing, getting the YouTube swag there. So appreciate all you guys with these Awesemo logos in chat. Guys, hit the like button. One last question here. What are you thinking, like going up to the slate? Like, what news are we looking out for still that could change the slate for you?
So we got the hard news. Jimmy Butler is the biggest one, I think, because that changes entirely how I approach Miami. But it also, as like a trickle down effect, it changes how I approach the center position. It changes how I approach some of the guard positions. It changes how I approach the small forward position because of Butler. So that's the really, really big piece. And that is one spot where, again, like I mentioned earlier, I'm playing, one lineup tonight, primarily in cash, but also in some tournaments. But that's one spot where, like, if there's a tiebreaker for me as far as using someone from a 7 or a 7:30 game or not using them, Jimmy Butler would be, if we don't have Jimmy Butler news, that would be a reason why I lean towards siding with the guy who hasn't started yet, because I want as much flexibility as possible to change my lineup entirely based on Jimmy Butler.
Definitely, yeah. If everyone's building like Butler will play, maybe we get some guys like Hero and Nunn that go a little bit under the radar. Guys, don't go anywhere. We have Terry and Greg coming up on Live Before Lock, taking you all the way up to 7 p.m. and also covering some SuperDraft, our sponsor. So make sure to tune in up to their lock at 7:30. And then late slate swap and sweat. We got Spags and EMAC later tonight. So make sure to tune in there. Guys, thanks for supporting the channel and the site. And stay tuned. We got another hour and a half up next.
That escalated quickly. Hopefully that's listening to me and not turning back on in the middle of the show. I get a copyright ding. Yep.
It's the Awesemo NBA Live Before Lock show, sponsored by SuperDraft. I don't know if I hit my cue there or not. The music, we just started and then we went. Like, all of a sudden, we're talking about Terry killed somebody, and then, like, the music started, and just producer Tyler was just telling me to go. I was like, I don't know if I hit my mark. I couldn't tell because the way the sound cuts out here. Terry, everything good? If I had to guess who you killed, I would say it was Adam Kaufman. You stole his DVD collection.
Yeah, between Kaufman and myself, I think we're going to open up a video store at some point. We're bringing that back. But no, the victim on the floor across the room was named Alexa, just this woman who works in my house and does things for me. But she wasn't paying attention to turn off the music, so we had to do something about it.
Yeah, we've got Rin back in the chat here. We've got a whole bunch of stuff here. And by the way, Anchor regular in the YouTube chat has said, is that a fake Kaufman crib? Yeah, I think you do have your knockoff Kaufman house.
Little bit. Mine's a little bit more informal. I go with the stacks on the floor. He's got all the nice shelves and the organization. His are probably alphabetized and organized by comedy and drama and everything. Mine are just in piles.
You know what I like about this slate is it is the first slate that I have hosted in what feels like a week now, maybe even longer, where James Harden wasn't questionable when we started the show. That's a nice little something that we get to. James Harden, for anybody who missed it, he was questionable to play earlier in the day. Now has been upgraded to in, so that is nice. And by the way, if you like that news, you should also like the YouTube video. You should subscribe to our YouTube channel, because here's a little secret. If you subscribe to the channel, we are more likely to get James Harden news early in the day. That's just what I heard. That's what people have told me, that whether the Nets put out James Harden news early in the day or not, it's solely dependent on how many subscribers we get to the Awesemo YouTube channel. So definitely something you guys want to do. Also, not only are Terry and I going up to 7 o'clock, like I said, the show is sponsored by SuperDraft. We're going to be doing another 30 minutes after regular slate lock to talk about SuperDraft and the SuperDraft slate. But for now, a slate where a little clearer than normal. We've got a whole bunch of guys that have ruled out. So let's start at the point guard position, Terry. FanDuel, DraftKings, who are some of the guys at the point guard position that really stand out to you as of now?
Well, I mean, after it was funny. I was writing my optimal lineups piece, and I was talking a little bit about Anthony Simons, and I had written through him and CJ McCollum. And by that time, everything completely changed, because that's when we got the Luka most likely not going to play. Jalen Brunson rocketed to the top of the board for me on both sites. So he is incredibly relevant. I think I'm not 100% sure if this is not, maybe somebody fat fingered something, but this is by far the highest optimal lineup rate I've ever seen. So give it a second while we double check the tool and make sure that the number's right. But I'm seeing him at 98.8% optimal lineup on DraftKings. That's a little bit high. But he is a remarkably good play today for the value that he's going to have running 32-ish minutes at those salaries. So whether it's that high, I don't know, but I think we're going to get to a lot of them.
Yeah, and I'm going to check really quick what our latest updated ownership projection is. Definitely something that we'll be talking a little bit about here during the show is just what some of these ownerships are for some of these guys who are, we just have so many strong value plays that have opened up now. Number one, 11-game slate, we could usually expect that to be the case. The other thing that I think is impacting a lot of the slates at this time of year is that now that we have this really condensed schedule and we're getting into the deeper part of the year, there is going to be so many players that start to get ruled out, because these guys now we're like, a little over halfway through the season, like 3/4 or so through the season. And guys have played so many games, and it's just so condensed, so many back-to-backs, that I think it's going to be an issue going forward with just rest and just a lot of injuries piling up at this point of the year. So I think we're going to see a lot of these slates like this going forward, where a whole bunch of guys end up getting ruled out, getting hurt. I agree with you. Jalen Brunson, certainly somebody we absolutely have to play in cash games. By the way, the ownership on Jalen Brunson right now, 62% on DraftKings, over 50% on FanDuel. Are you willing? So I know you just said you like him a lot, but are you willing to go above even what that number is?
Yeah, it sounds crazy for an 11-game slate when we've got so many different options on the board, and there are other good options in that salary tier below, slightly above. Like, you can get to different players at that spot and still be fairly strong in the optimal lineup rate and be rolling up pretty good plays. It's just, he is just spectacularly destroying everyone else in Alex's numbers, that I think, to me, it makes sense. We're seeing him come up 50% owned, but a gigantic positive leverage score because of how frequently he's coming up in those optimal lineups. So we just updated that, and that 98.8 held over on DK. So, hey man, there's no questioning that if that's a true number, and if that's what Alex is seeing, that's essentially telling you to lock him in regardless of what that ownership looks like. So stay tuned on what that thing does. But at his price, his utility between point guard and shooting guard today, just being able to move him around, he's got a 64% boom score probability, just a tremendous spot. Doesn't have to do a lot. He's coming in projected at right around the ceiling score that he needs. So not going to exactly have to do very much beyond that to, have a tremendous ton of value for us today.
Yeah, and just news that the pricing algorithm wasn't able to update for, because we had no clue that Luka Doncic was going to be out. By the way, now I'm just looking back at that other slate where, what was it, 2 games ago, where Luka just totally crapped the bed, and I'm saying, oh, he was probably hurt during that game. I wish he would have just not played, so I didn't roster him that day. That would have been nice news to get. Yeah, that would have been fantastic to know that ahead of time that it was going to be terrible. Jalen Brunson's numbers as a starter this year. He has made 8 starts, playing 33 minutes per game in those starts, averaging 29 DraftKings points. The usage hasn't been especially high, but something else to consider, in a handful of those starts, Luka Doncic was on the court. So, I mean, if we just look, it's hard for me to find the numbers on the fly of the starts he's made where there was no Luka. I know there was one earlier in the year without against Chicago without Luka, where he ended up playing 38 minutes. He scored 49 DraftKings points. So the ceiling is especially high with Brunson. And like I said, cash games, you absolutely have to play him. Some other point guards. I'm kind of curious for your take on Michael Carter-Williams. He's a little bit different for me on FanDuel versus DraftKings, just as 5,500 on FanDuel, 6,600 on DraftKings. This Magic team is so ridiculous to look at. Now, first of all, they only have 8 players active today that I count in the rotation, and I'm going to double check that to make sure that's the case. But I'm pretty sure 8 players active. So anybody who's out there is going to have to play a significant amount of minutes. That and the guys who they do have active all suck. Like it's a terrible team. They traded away Vucevic. They traded away Fournier. They traded away Aaron Gordon. So their active roster for today is Michael Carter-Williams, Mo Bamba, James Ennis, Dwayne Bacon, Chuma Okeke, Kareem Mane, Kem Birch, and Chasen Randall. Those are your Orlando Magic 2021 post All-Star break. So Michael Carter-Williams is somebody who, at first I looked at the 6,600 price tag earlier in the day, and I said, like, even if Terrence Ross is out, there's no way I'm going to get to Michael Carter-Williams at that price. No, I am getting to Michael Carter-Williams at that price. Not at a huge amount on DraftKings, but he's in about 15% of my lineups. Now, FanDuel, it's impossible for him to not be a core play for me just because he's 5,500. Somebody's going to score. Even if this team loses 100 to 75, somebody's putting those 75 points up on the board. So how do you feel about Michael Carter-Williams, and are there any other cheap guards from the Magic that you're looking at?
Yeah, I think MCW definitely on FanDuel gets some attention at least, and he warrants it. You know, he's coming up nearly 40% optimal for Alex in our simulations. I was getting him a little bit less than that. Just he projected out a little bit lower for me, but I think it's a matter of me not adjusting the usage properly and adjusting for the ridiculous situation that these guys are in today properly. So we'll see which comes out on top. But yeah, he's coming up a ton for me. I think he's almost entirely off the board on DK. Like, would you play him at all at 6,600 and pretty massively negative leverage on DK? I think there's just so many better options.
I have a little bit of exposure to him. That also could change depending on what happens with the Heat news. Let me see in my latest run. Yeah, I have him at 15% right now. So
okay.
It's also, let's look at some of the guards who are
outpacing
in
the field
range.
a little bit, actually.
Sorry, what was that?
So you'd be outpacing the field a little bit on him as of the last update. Anyway, they're like 13-ish, so you're going a little bit over the field. That's interesting. What brings you to him at that price over there? Like, does something jump out where you're actually trying to get to him, or is it just happenstance?
I have him projected for about 36.5 fantasy points, and that's something that's pretty key for me at that price point. And then it's also just the thing where there's so much playing time and usage available in that offense that, like I said earlier in the day, I didn't think I was going to be getting to him really at all at 6,600. But then I just started building my lineups, and I just have him projected for such a strong points per dollar play that unless there's something else that happens, like I have Michael Carter-Williams for 37 minutes. Maybe I just have him. I think I have him for a little bit more playing time than most other people in the industry. And
that would be the difference. It looks like
it's hard to find out where else those minutes are going to go. If this game's even remotely close, like it seems ridiculous to say, but Michael Carter-Williams is the best player on an NBA team in 2021.
Yeah, you're not kidding. That's absolutely true. The way I put it in my article today was they traded all their non-replacement level players for replacements, and now they're just stuck with these guys. So that's basically where they're at. Let me see what happens to Carter-Williams if I change him to 37. I guess that's the wrong spot. I guess I'm going to get him a little bit more, and it's a FanDuel, so I mean he would jump dramatically on FanDuel, but I'm curious to see exactly how much more.
It's funny
how that takes him nearly another 20 percentage points up toward hitting his target score for me. So that is an important 4 minutes.
It's funny because, also 4 minutes is a really big deal, except also sometimes even just if you give somebody one more minute or one less minute, it drastically changes how you'll view individual players. And the other thing also, like I said, there's so much usage available on Orlando that, I mean, if not Michael Carter-Williams, who do you think it is that's going to be doing the majority of the scoring for them?
Oh God. I mean, I think you were probably right that they're going to score around 75 points tonight. I don't think it's going to be, Kareem Mane, so what, 0.34 fantasy point producer so far in limited action this year. We've talked about Jason Randall. I don't think is much of an NBA player, having seen him a little bit with the Knicks, mostly with the Westchester Knicks and what he's done this year. I think James Ennis has a shot at being relevant when you take all the guys who aren't going to be here off the floor. He jumped to something, if memory serves, it was like a 1.18 fantasy point per minute rate. So it's a significant rate. 5,000 at the small forward on FanDuel is somewhat relevant. It was a spot that I was trying to get some value, either value out of the mid range or, if I could go drop down even further at the small forward. There were a few plays, but it was clicking together a little clunkily, and he's not sneaky. He's like 17% owned, coming up more owned than he is optimal over there. And he's less relevant at 6,000 on the DK slate, I think. So yeah, Dwayne Bacon, you could throw him into the mix. He's not a guy I really trust. I know Alex was on him a little bit, but scoring dependent type of a guy, going to need a shot to go down for the season across all situations, 0.65 fantasy points per minute. 4,700, like if he was 4,200, 3,800, something like that, I'd be all over him as a value play. I don't think he really pops for the FanDuel side of things. I think you do get a little utility out of Bacon on DK, where you can move him between guard and forward. So that's a little interesting and keeping him somewhat relevant. But he's, again, not a guy who's a secret. People are going to be on him. So it's an interesting, ugly, ugly team tonight. I think somebody from this team is going to be relevant, but who the hell it is, I do not know.
Yeah, I mean, I have some exposure to basically anybody who I expect is going to start for Orlando, just because, like I said, there's value there. It's not something I feel comfortable about, but this is a team that I felt like, looking at my projections, I had to target at least a little bit. If I'm looking for a value play at point guard that isn't Michael Carter-Williams or one of the other crappy guard plays for Orlando, somebody else who is standing out to me is Anthony Simons. So Damian Lillard is out tonight, and he is resting. So with that in mind, we're trying to figure out where the minutes are going. CJ McCollum is going to be an obvious play on both FanDuel and DraftKings. But in terms of a cheap guard value, I'm landing on Anthony Simons a lot. Are you getting to him a decent amount? And do you think he's going to end up starting in place of Damian Lillard?
Yeah, I think it makes sense that he's going to be out there. And even if he's not starting, I think he's going to get essentially starters minutes. Alex had him at 27 earlier in the day. He's at, 27 and change still right now. At the min price on FanDuel, I think it was almost a lock type play earlier until we got the Brunson news for me. So I was getting to a ton of Simons and MCW. Now I'll be getting to a ton of Brunson with a good amount of Simons and MCW in the second spot. I think it makes a lot of sense to start chopping up ownership between those two. And, see what you can get with the savings. Simons is a significant savings from what we're paying for Carter Williams, and they're coming up relatively similarly optimal. Throughout all situations this year is 0.79. I've got him at a 0.81, taking Lillard off the floor and leaving him alongside CJ. So it's not a massive bump, but for him, it's more about the minutes and the price. If we're expecting his production anything near that at the minutes that we've got for him at the dead minimum on FanDuel, close enough to it on DK at 3,700. I think he's a very, very strong play, and he's going under owned now.
Something else that's going to be important here. Are you assuming Norm Powell is in or out right now? I have him out.
Yeah, I had him out. I heard them talking about it on the last show, and I said, oh man, I hope that's not something I have to change, because that kind of shakes things up.
Yes.
So I'm going to just operate under the assumption that he's out until we hear otherwise.
Yeah, so that's with me also. So one of the reasons I like Anthony Simons so much as a value play is we saw games early in the year where Damian Lillard was out, where it was kind of Simons and Gary Trent would both see a bump in playing time, but more of it went to Trent. Now, obviously, Gary Trent was traded for Norman Powell, so I think it's just all going to be Simons. But Powell is listed as questionable on the injury report, so it seems there is some chance he plays. I'm assuming he's out because it's not all that often we see somebody traded and then just play the next day. But I am a little concerned that he's listed as questionable, because if he plays, I'm going to have to take down Simon's minutes a little bit. And that's definitely going to impact him, because like I said before, like the difference between me giving Simons 28 minutes or giving him 24 minutes is like a whole difference in between him being like a core play for me or just somebody who's, one of the guys in my player pool. Before going on, I want to address this super chat we got here from Big Chungus. He's asking us top 3 GPP plays on DraftKings. Overall, let's see. The players I have the most exposure to on DK are Jalen Brunson, CJ McCollum, and this one is going to be uncomfortable. Mo Bamba.
I knew that was what you were gonna say.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about the center position later, but just another one who, just talking about that Magic rotation right now. First of all, I assume that Mo Bamba is going to start at center and Kem Birch is going to back him up off the bench. If Mo Bamba doesn't start, then that's going to change my minutes projection for him pretty dramatically. But as of right now, I mean, Mo Bamba on DraftKings is 4,800. He's a guy who produces well over a fantasy point per minute for his career. And if he starts and plays somewhere in the neighborhood of 26 to 28 minutes, we're looking at north of 30 fantasy points for Mo Bamba at a cheap price tag. And it's not like he's picking up all that much ownership right now. To me, I think Bamba is probably the most under-owned of the cheap plays on the Magic. A bunch of them are picking up pretty high ownership, but only 12% for Bamba on DraftKings right now. So he's somebody who I like a lot as a GPP play.
Yeah, same here. Surprisingly low ownership, and especially when you're looking at it on our boom bust tool and compared to where Alex is getting with some of the rates that he's putting up on the DraftKings slate. So really interesting over there. And Alex is getting good numbers on him with only a 22-minute projection. So it looks like he's splitting those center minutes, somewhat down the middle, and not really getting too aggressive. So I imagine if we see that come up, he would just explode up the page even more. So yeah, I think those were the top three plays when I sorted on Alex's board. I think they'd be the top three plays for me on the DK slate as well. So yeah, the Mo Bamba one, very uncomfortable. The top two ones I think are just kind of lock and load, comfy type plays. And then you get a little GPP-ish, a little uncomfortable and a nice solid leverage play going to Mo.
All right, so here's something very funny. Apparently, as soon as I finished talking, because I just got an alert on my phone, the Magic put out their starting lineup. Mo Bamba not starting. So here's the starting lineup for Orlando: Michael Carter-Williams, Dwayne Bacon, Ennis, Okeke, and Birch. So now I'm going to have to adjust the Orlando starting lineup minutes here. What do you make of that news, with that being the starting lineup?
Well, let's see. We were at a 28-minute projection for Birch, and he was not coming up super relevant on either slate, really. So changing that to the starters minutes. And then, like I said, the Bamba minutes were down. Did I not update this part with the minutes? Let me just double check what I'm saying as I'm talking about these minutes, because some of that is standing out as a little bit odd looking to me. So while you're updating, I will too. Does that put Birch in play for you? Because for me, he was coming up even earlier as not really in play if he jumped up to his starters minutes. But what I'm curious about is what it's going to do to Bamba in Alex's projections.
Yeah, so I'm going to say now, I think it's going to be a timeshare between Bamba and Birch, obviously with a lean towards Birch now that he is starting. So I'm going to go 26 minutes for Birch and 22 for Bamba. That is probably going to make Bamba still in play for me, but not nearly the priority for. Like I just said, he was my third highest owned player, and that's not going to be the case anymore.
That makes sense. That he'd still be relevant because, I mean, he is, like you said, he's a 1.22 fantasy point per minute producer across all situations this season. He doesn't need a ton of run, but taking it down, a few pegs is definitely going to hurt him. It's not like he's a min price guy, 4,600 and some opportunity cost at center on FanDuel, 4,800 on DK. You're going to lose a little bit of edge on where he was as of 2 or 3 minutes ago.
All right. So, oh boy, the hits keep coming. Starting lineup for the Portland Trailblazers. Norman Powell is starting. So there we go. Something else we're going to have to update there. So this is going to impact Anthony Simons, by the way. Also, Dennis Smith Jr., he is out. So lots of news items to get to. We just talked briefly about the Orlando Magic, and now updating. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give Kem Birch 26 minutes, Mo Bamba 22. So I assume 22 minutes for Mo Bamba. That's probably going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of like 25 to 26 fantasy points for him, which is going to make him, like I said, in play for me, but just not nearly to the same degree that he was before. What do you make of this Powell news now? How much is this going to impact Anthony Simons for you on both FanDuel and DraftKings?
Oh, that's going to be interesting. I mean, we're talking about a new piece to their puzzle, so we have no idea how he's going to fit into the rotation, what they're going to do with him in terms of usage, minutes. Excellent, 3-and-D type player. I have to assume it's going to knock enough off of Simon's minutes where, kind of like what we talked about before, when we had him at 27-ish minutes, he was coming up with like a 24-point raw projection. Knock him down to even like 22, 23 minutes. That's going to come down enough that he might not have enough juice even at the min salary to really make that up enough. So let's see if I can do that in mine. So if I take him from 27 to 23 minutes on FanDuel, he drops to like a 19 projection where he was at 25-ish. And it basically cuts his optimal lineup rate for me about in half. So he's not totally dead in the water, but he's a lot less relevant with that news.
All right. And I just posted in the YouTube chat. One thing that's funny is when you're building lineups early, you kind of have to make an assumption with a lot of these news items, right? You have to guess, like if somebody's listed as questionable, like James Harden the other day, you're ultimately guessing, is he in or is he out? Jimmy Butler, we just found Jimmy Butler, at least somebody in the Slack, in the YouTube chat said that he was going to play. And yes, that is true. Jimmy Butler is in. He was sick the other day, was dealing with a stomach ailment. He is going to be in. We'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, you have to guess on these news items whether these guys are going to be in or out. And yeah, so far between Terry and I, we've gotten all of them wrong so far. Just 50-50 propositions, wrong on all of them. Every player is questionable. Starting lineups, wrong. Players who are questionable, wrong. So now we have Jimmy Butler is in. Also, interesting note here, Jusuf Nurkic is going to start over Enes Kanter tonight for the Portland Trailblazers, but Nurkic is going to be limited to about 20 minutes. So I know we just talked about Anthony Simons for a second. As it pertains to Jusuf Nurkic, does this change anything for you with the Trailblazers?
It doesn't really change anything from kind of what my expectation was going in. And even yesterday when I wrote up Enes Kanter for what might be the last time this season, I just think Nurk coming back, at least at the price that Kanter was at, it just kind of nerfs everything for everybody right now with Nurk not getting his full run, but still chewing enough into what Kanter's going to do. I think it probably takes everybody down just enough that it just knocks them off the board. I think, Kanter was coming up a little bit relevant still for Alex at least, but I don't really think we're going to get there. 6,000 on FanDuel. Yeah, it looks like in the last update, actually, he knocked him down to like 21 minutes and it took away his relevance. So I think we can safely cross the centers off for Portland, and happy to see Nurk back. It's nice to have him recovered from that injury, and he will probably be relevant soon, but especially if he stays at the low price. But until we get 28 minutes at least, if he's at 28 minutes and a 5,200 price, we can talk.
All right. So we talked about how Anthony Simons with Norman Powell being in, how that's going to impact his minutes a little bit. Norman Powell's still a fairly high usage player. Is this going to impact CJ McCollum for you at all? Because McCollum is one of the most popular plays on the slate. To me, still a great play even with Powell in, but maybe a little bit of a downtick in usage for him now, but to the point where like maybe I'm getting from 70% CJ McCollum to like 60% CJ McCollum. Is this going to impact him at all for you? Because Norman Powell is somebody who at least brings them more offense than they would have had otherwise.
Yeah, it is putting another good player who does consume some usage next to him. But, just thinking about it in terms of CJ McCollum typically plays next to Damian Lillard, who is a much higher usage and better player than Norm Powell. So thinking about it through that prism, when we take Lillard off the floor, McCollum's assist rate goes up from like 20% to like 30%. So he does things a little bit differently, but still scores the ball pretty well. So I think he's going to just, maybe it changes the way in which he's going to score some points for us. He might pick up a few more assists, having a wingman to play with. But I don't think it really takes him down that much. Maybe we reduce the usage, but we expect a couple additional assists and see him get it that way.
Yeah, and by the way, CJ McCollum is projected for 43.6% ownership on FanDuel. On DraftKings, he's projected for 35.6% ownership. I'm overweight to the field on both of those numbers. Yeah. So considering the ownership in tournaments, are you heavy or light on McCollum?
Yeah, I would be over the field on both of those. Not sure exactly where, but probably somewhere in that like 65-70 range at least.
Yeah, that's what I had, 70% McCollum before. I'm updating my lineups now with the Portland Trailblazers news, the Orlando Magic news, basically all the news, changing all that now. The other news...
You're building a whole slate.
Yeah. The other thing also that's going to not really have a major impact, but a slight impact to CJ McCollum, just because he's somebody else who I'm adding to my player pool now in the mid-range on DraftKings. Jimmy Butler now officially ruled active. Butler, like we said, I was unsure if he was going to play. He was listed as questionable. Like every other news item that I've gotten wrong, I had Jimmy Butler out before. So that is something else that I have to update as my browser just totally crashes so that everything I was looking at just disappears. But But either way, yeah. So Jimmy Butler, he was priced at 9,000 on DraftKings off the top of my head. On FanDuel, I think it was 92 or 9,300, just going off memory because, like I said, everything just crashed for me. Jimmy Butler, what are you doing with him? Were you assuming that he was in or out? And I saw some people asking about Kendrick Nunn before, Tyler Hero. How does it impact some of the other role players on the Heat?
Yeah, so I had Jimmy in because I was lucky enough to be going off of Alex's minutes today. I didn't mess around too much with what I got from the boss. So I just pasted him back in with the latest update. And it looks like we've got him for pretty much full run, 33 and a half minutes, playing alongside Hero and Bam. All three of those guys stand out pretty decently in Alex's numbers, both in terms of their optimal rates and for the fact that they're getting some leverage here now. That might change. We might see a little bit of a downturn in the leverage as the ownership comes up with people realizing that Jimmy's available and going to be playing. But I think all three of those guys, you're getting Tyler Hero at a decent price at 5,200 at a shooting guard spot where there are a couple high-end options and then there's a lot of meh kind of stuff. So getting to him as a extreme pay down from the star caliber, the McCollums and the James Hardens of the world at shooting guard, I think keeps him pretty relevant. On DK, 5,600, you get to move him between the two guard spots, has some relevance over there too. And then I think some of the Kendrick Nunns, the Dunk Robinsons, they're priced at a decent spot on with enough flexibility on DraftKings at 4,900, 4,700. Even Ariza looks like he's got a little bit of utility on DraftKings now, moving between both forward spots at only 3,400, assuming that 27-minute projection holds up. So there's some interesting pieces on the Heat now. Not a tough matchup against Charlotte. Should be able to run it back and forth a little bit of a pace up. So I like the spot for the Heat. I didn't think I was going to, but it looks like they're a little bit more relevant now, even more than like mix-in type guys. I think these are guys that I kind of want to start getting to now across a decent amount of lineups, unless that leverage score changes.
All right. Yeah, I am updating my lineups. Now that I have everything back up and running, I'm definitely trying to get to Jimmy Butler. The other news item here that came across while we're talking about everything else and something else people are asking questions about is Dennis Smith Jr., somebody who I did the strategy show earlier in the day with Josh. He really liked Dennis Smith Jr. as a point guard option, assuming that he was going to be in. He is now out. So that potentially opens up minutes in the backcourt for Detroit. Something else of note here, because people were asking about him. Hamidou Diallo is expected to play today for Detroit. The other thing also is that Corey Joseph is expected to play, so he could probably pick up a chunk of the minutes that were left behind by Dennis Smith Jr. So what expectations, if any, do you have for this Detroit rotation?
I expect that Jeremy Grant is going to play a lot of minutes and take a lot of shots.
I'm on the same board with you.
Mason Plumlee probably going to be in the middle, taking some shots. Look, I think those are probably the guys that I would go to on this team, just given that everything else is kind of a question mark right now. Looking at Alex's board and taking some of his cues, I'm not seeing anybody really jump off the page. Like he's got Hamidou Diallo for a small amount of minutes, but I assume that goes up, taking Dennis Smith off the board. So I assume we get a little bit more Hamidou Diallo at 4,100. I think he could gain some relevance if he jumps to like 28 minutes. So we'll see. He's been a 1.02 fantasy point per minute producer, but of course that's not with this team. So we don't exactly know how he's going to mesh in here. But I think he could gain some relevance just based on that price. On DK, 4,900 is probably a little bit too heavy a freight, but we'll see how it comes out because he does have that multi-position eligibility between guard and forward. But there's just not a ton that I really want to go to here unless the board changes significantly. So I'll see what happens as we take Dennis Smith off of here. Because it is, it could potentially be a good spot in a game with, pretty much no defense.
Yeah, so here's the issue, and we have a super chat from Savage X Plus. I'll address that in a second, but here's the issue I have as I'm looking at the Detroit rotation. There is so much value on this slate. I don't really want to assume that any of those cheapish guys on Detroit, and I don't think Corey Joseph's even in the player pool. I'll have to check that in a second, but I don't think there's any player here that I feel super confident in or that I even think is likely to be a good value play. So I don't want it to be a thing where I assume like, oh, hey, I'm going to give Hamidou Diallo 32 minutes and then he shows up in my lineups. And then it's like, oh, Diallo isn't that involved in the Pistons rotation, his first game. So I'm more inclined to just give the Detroit players flat minutes across the board, just so I don't get to anybody other than a small percentage of Jeremy Grant. because I don't want to be invested in guys that I'm not all that confident in when there are a bunch of value plays on this slate that I am pretty confident in, or there's a bunch of mid-range plays like we talked about, CJ McCollum, who's very reasonably priced on FanDuel and DraftKings. I don't want to give some guy on the Pistons some egregiously high projection to where it takes away from plays I actually like. So I'm gonna not give anybody a significant amount of minutes just for the purpose of making sure I don't get to any plays that I don't actually feel confident in. By the way, now that super chat that we got here from Savage X Plus, thoughts on Jared Allen playing against Morris? Is Allen a smash play? I'm not going to say it's a bad matchup for him, except Jared Allen to me, and also I'm not sure what site he's talking about, but Jared Allen, 7,900 on DraftKings, and then on FanDuel, off the top of my price, what was it?
67.
Yeah, 67. So 67 is a slightly more favorable price tag, obviously, but there's other center plays I prefer. So if you're playing Jared Allen on DraftKings, I think he's too expensive. If you're playing on FanDuel, I think that is a favorable price point, but there's other guys I would rather get to. So if you're calling him a smash play and being like, hey, I'm all in on Jared Allen, like to me, I think that's a little aggressive. Like I'd rather get to Bam Adebayo at 8,000. I'd rather get to Christian Wood at 77. I'd rather pay up for Karl Anthony Towns. How do you view Jared Allen on this slate? And I assume it's a FanDuel question based on the difference in price.
Yeah, he was coming up a little bit for me, and the lineup that I built before the show, I just had enough money to spend. It was really awkward just the way that things fit together. So I think in optimizers, he might come up a little bit more than what we're expecting in just the general public ownership, because he does have, kind of an upside at that price, but he wasn't landing in our optimal lineup in simulations a significant amount of the time, because we've got like James Wiseman at a value number. We've got Mo Bamba, of course, to wrestle with at a value number, and he was coming up in the optimal a significant amount of the time. But when you're talking about like a proposition for some raw points, some general upside for his salary, which 6,700 is not a big salary in this matchup. So I think he could put up a decent score, which is how I kind of landed on him in just clicking around in hand building. And I think we might see that just by virtue of where the optimizers are going to spend a little bit of money. So I'm very curious to see how it all comes out in the wash with that one. Again, we weren't getting him a tremendous amount of time in the optimal, but he does have pretty nice peripheral numbers in this spot and should be getting, a full run in a pretty good spot against the depleted Lakers squad. So I do like the player kind of more in a vacuum than I do as compared to other options on the slate, which is never really how we want to make this decision. But I think he's somewhat relevant and probably more relevant than some of the guys above him at higher prices, like a Jokic, like a Karl Anthony Towns. Those guys are both very relevant and good tournament plays to mix in, but you're paying a lot of freight and they're not coming up optimal nearly as much as a lot of the cheap guys up top. So I think Allen slots in more with those cheaper guys up top than he does with like the star level guys that we're not getting to a ton.
All right, so moving over to some of the shooting guards now, and I know James Harden is point guard eligible on DraftKings, but let's throw him into the shooting guard mix just for the purpose of discussion. Guard eligible in general, but shooting guard eligible on FanDuel. How are you prioritizing James Harden? Because he's a guy who I felt like I was going to get a ton of, and I am overweight to the field on Harden because he's only coming in a projected 15% ownership right now on DraftKings. But CJ McCollum is such a high priority for me at guard that it minimalizes the amount of Harden that I thought I was going to get to at least a little bit. Obviously, James Harden, favorable matchup against the Pistons. No Kyrie Irving, no Kevin Durant. I have him projected as the highest player on the slate overall, but I'm finding myself building lineups, or at least the optimizers building lineups, a little bit more in the mid-range than I would have thought otherwise. So James Harden, how high of a priority has he become for you on this slate?
Yeah, I like the idea of getting to both him and McCollum, and you can do it. It's not prohibitively expensive, given McCollum is at a little bit of a discount for just being CJ McCollum, and then at a pretty strong discount for the role that he should see tonight, with or without Norm Powell. I think he's still at a pretty good discount there. So just taking a look, I was talking about it before with the top two pricey options on FanDuel, going by Alex's optimal rate. Just looking at the two of them, McCollum and Harden, it accounts for 126.7% of our 200% of optimal lineup slots. So those guys are just supreme priorities on the FanDuel slate. And then we can start mixing and matching in some of our lineups where we want to move around some different shares, maybe get to Giannis in some spots if we're not getting to him along with those guys. I was able to put together what I think is a decent lineup with both of those guys and Giannis. But you can start mixing in some of Tyler Herro, Andrew Wiggins. if you want to go to like Dwayne Bacon and roll the dice there, you know, some of these other guys at this spot. But it's a really shallow and just kind of ugly looking position, particularly on FanDuel today. You get more options, of course, on DK, a little bit more that you can do moving pieces around. So I like it better over there. But on FanDuel, I'm very, very concentrated on McCollum and Harden.
All right, so we have a question here that I think we should address, because somebody's saying, why is CJ so chalk? He probably won't even play 30 minutes. I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess if they absolutely destroy, if they just nuke the Magic, then yeah, maybe he'll play less minutes than normal. But here's the reason he's chalk. A few reasons. Number one, his price is down from where we normally see because he's coming back from an injury. He came back, he was playing limited minutes, so his production was down, and that led to a decrease in price. He was somebody who was priced in the mid 8K range when he first came back from his foot injury. The minutes restriction is gone now. He's now playing full minutes. And the second now, most importantly, Damian Lillard's out tonight. So now we have CJ McCollum expected to pick up a lot more usage. There's probably going to be a little bit more playing time going to him. There's going to be more playmaking duties for him. And then also it's a shorthanded team a little bit because the trade deadline just happened. So you consider those factors. And then one of the things there that I assume the reason that whoever asked the question, I forget the question went away about him playing limited minutes. This is still a game on the road. The Trailblazers are 11.5-point favorites over the Magic. The Magic are so bad right now, though, that I understand that you would look at that and just be like, oh, it's guaranteed to be a blowout. 11.5 points. If the game is actually played at a spread about 11.5 points, the Stars are still playing the fourth quarter. That's what kind of makes it hard to predict blowouts in the NBA is that even these massive spreads, 12, 13 points, the Stars are still playing in the fourth quarter if that's the spread. So there are times where it's a concern. It's a little bit less of a concern for me when they're playing on the road. It's hard to take players out of your player pool just totally for blowouts. I'm not going to say it's not a risk, but it's probably not as big of a risk as most people think.
Yeah, that's generally the side of that I land on, unless it's some kind of a wacky situation, which I guess considering this Orlando team and that spread, we are approaching a wacky situation with this one. But I think there's enough reason to leave McCollum in, rely on the fact that he's going to get 32, 34 minutes and, hope for the upside toward 36 minutes. We've got him projected around that 36-minute mark, and he looks fantastic. So if he comes in a little bit under that, I think he's still extremely, extremely productive. I've had a 34.8 assist night the other night, playing half the game at least alongside Dame Lillard. He got CJ had 35. Dame only played 22 minutes. But, Dame was 6 for 19 in that one. CJ made up a lot of the ground, and I think he's that kind of player. He's perfectly capable of doing it. And like you were saying, he's priced for coming back from injury but playing alongside Dame. Now he's not playing alongside Dame. So this is a misprice, and that's what we're taking advantage of. That's why he's chalky.
All right, we have another news item here. This one, maybe a little bit more expected. Kevin Porter Jr. officially ruled out by the Houston Rockets. He was considered questionable coming into today. And when asked by reporters what his injury status was, Kevin Porter Jr. said, "I'm questionable. I'm not sure if I'm going to play or not." Now we know that he's going to be ruled out. I think that Kevin Porter has such a wide range of outcomes this year. Like, I don't know what to expect from him. He could start and be one of the better fantasy producers in the league going forward. He could be a guy who's marginalized in a bench role and doesn't play a massive role. But when he's on the court, he carries a pretty significant usage rate. So I actually do think this matters a little bit. I'm going to be bumping up both Christian Wood and John Wall with this news. It's just one less guy they have to compete with for usage. You look at the rest of the players on the team, Jayshawn Tate, Daniel House, Sterling Brown, Kenyon Martin Jr. These are low usage guys. So all of the shots are going to John Wall and Christian Wood right now. And neither of them are really all that popular with plays. Bringing up these guys' ownership on DraftKings right now. John Wall project for 12% ownership. Christian Wood is projecting for, 10% ownership. I'm going to be overweight to the field on both those guys on DraftKings. On FanDuel, Christian Wood is projected for 18% ownership, so a little bit more popular, and I think that's about correct. John Wall projecting for 14% ownership on FanDuel. I think that's a number to be over also. So now with this Kevin Porter Jr. news, what are you doing with the Rockets, guys? And does this really change anything for you?
Yeah, I think those are the right guys to be getting to. It's another team that's like, maybe these guys are a tick above replacement levels, taking obviously Christian Wood and John Wall out of the equation, but they're not very far above replacement level, and they're low usage type guys. You want to go in there, and Daniel House, we've got projected for 33 minutes and a pretty irrelevant 33 minutes. Do we want to rely on him for our night? Maybe if you're playing 150 lineups, you mix and match him into a couple of them because he's not crazy expensive. He plays at that flat small forward spot. But yeah, it's just not where I want to go with this team. And I think we've got enough on the board that we don't have to. It's another squad like Detroit where you just don't have to make these guesses, don't have to force guys in. If this was a 5-game slate, it would be really different. We'd be scrambling to find which ones of the value plays are here. But I think, yeah, just focus in on the two guys are good NBA players, going to see significant run, going to see all the usage, and are getting a little bit under-owned. So I think that makes a ton of sense.
All right, so we had a couple of super chats come in here. First from Shmoney B. Wiseman, Markieff Morris, or none as the last man on DraftKings. For me right now, that's Wiseman. I would have preferred none by a lot of this group had Jimmy Butler been ruled out. To me, it comes down to Wiseman versus none. I lean towards Wiseman. I know he was terrible yesterday, but still a guy for the year who's producing about a fantasy point per minute. I think he's somebody who's going to play like 26 to 30 minutes per game going forward now that he's locked into the starting center role for the Warriors. The other thing to consider too about Wiseman is Golden State looks like they're going to be a fringe playoff team. Maybe they could even fall out of the playoff mix. I think they're going to make more of a priority to focus on building for the future, especially because Steph Curry is out right now. Not that he's going to be out for forever, but he's out for at least long enough that it's going to hurt their playoff chances. So I think that's going to make Wiseman a little bit more of a priority than playing minutes to guys like Kevon Looney or Eric Pascal. So slight lean towards Wiseman, but I don't really love any of those three guys. Just to reiterate, that was James Wiseman, Markieff Morris, and Kendrick Nunn. So of those three guys, Terry, which one would you play in your lineup?
Yeah, that was firmly Wiseman for me as well on both sites. I was getting to a good amount of them on FanDuel. He was coming up as one of the pretty good value plays over there. We've seen him be a bit of a roller coaster through the year, but to your point, 1.03 fantasy points per minute. And he's getting under-owned on both sites by our numbers, which is what I really liked and what jumped out at him. I don't normally go to value plays on FanDuel with a singular center, but he's only 4,200 and he was popping into a good amount of my lineup. So it would be Wiseman for me for sure.
All right. And J187555, he wants to know if the optimal lineup numbers are accurate right now in the Boom Bust tool. Let me check. Has that changed?
Yeah, they're changing around. It's been updated a lot. We update that one pretty frequently as we crash into locks. So I just got an update as of about a minute and change ago, and I'm dropping that into my spreadsheet here. I believe these numbers are accurate, guys, and you can always rely on if the numbers are there, especially if they're there and then it updates and they're still there, it's probably going to be accurate. I know I brought up a question mark because I had never seen a 98.81 before. And it looks like that has come down a little bit for Jalen Brunson. He's at 53.4 now. So we had some changes, though, as well on the slate. So some of that, maybe a little bit of a change in the simulation. But yeah, we're down a little bit in those optimal rates. But everything we're seeing in the latest update should be accurate.
Yeah, I think there was something that was a little off with Brunson, but it's been updated now and all the numbers are correct now. So you're good to look at that and no real worries. So yeah, all good on the Boom Bust tool now. We haven't talked about forwards at all, so let's jump over there now. I think the first guy we need to talk about is Kristaps Porzingis. He is going to be in uber chalk play now that we have Luka Doncic out. So FanDuel, the price is just ridiculous on Porzingis, 7,500. Reading off the ownership for him, I mean, he's projected to be one of the highest owned players on FanDuel today. What kind of a stance are you taking on Porzingis? I think he's a little bit different on FanDuel and DraftKings. Personally, I like him on both sites, but it's hard to ignore the 7,500 price tag on FanDuel. So how do you feel about him? And do you mind that he's currently projected for, what's the latest ownership now? 41% ownership on FanDuel. First for starters, absolute must play in cash games, in my opinion. But what are you doing with Porzingis in tournaments?
Yeah, I still like the spot. I think, he slots in just so well at the power forward that I think we can ignore. It's slightly negative leverage, but I think he's good enough that he's pushing past that. Going to take the lead dog role with Dallas with Luka out. 1.23 fantasy point per minute producer. Just really like the spot for KP. I think he was underpriced on FanDuel just for a game with Luka, honestly, at 7,500. So slight underprice regardless. With Luka coming off the floor, I definitely think that's kind of a smash spot and one we can go to. I consider him, it's what I call a building block type play, good chalk, something where we can kind of ride with the field, not sweat it too much. There are some good mix and match type plays at the power forward on FanDuel, but nobody approaches the degree to which we're getting him optimal. So I think he's our fundamental guy, and then we can use that second square to roll some of these other guys through.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Even where he's more expensive on DraftKings, still, I mean, Porzingis, there's going to be a usage bump getting to him. I have him about 40% of my lineups right now on DraftKings. Just a guy who's really tough to ignore with Luka off the court. Some of these other Mavs guys, I know we talked about Jalen Brunson earlier, but some other guys who have, oh, by the way, also just to read this off really quick, starting lineup for the Houston Rockets, John Wall, Ben McLemore, Sterling Brown, Jay Sean Tate, Christian Wood. I look at that starting lineup and just say John Wall and Christian Wood are getting all the shots and nobody else is going to touch the ball that often. But getting back to the Mavericks, so some of these other ancillary pieces, Tim Hardaway Jr., Dorian Finney-Smith, Josh Richardson. What are you doing with those guys? Are any of these value plays really standing out to you?
You just named several of my least favorite players to roster in DFS. These Dallas role players, I never get them right. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but like I can't remember the last time I got Timmy Hardaway right. He's a guy that 5,400. He's probably priced pretty appropriately, even for this spot with Luka out. Like that's just a good price for a streaky guy like Timmy Hardaway. He does do it every now and again. 0.82 fantasy point per minute producer. He's okay, but he's just dicey enough for me that I don't get to him a lot. And I think the numbers are backing me up on that. Only coming up 6.4% optimal and doubled up on that mark in our ownership. So negatively leveraged Tim Hardaway. No, thank you. Josh Richardson, 5,200, kind of a similar situation, but comes up a lot more optimal. I was getting to him a little bit more just because the small forward spot is just, there's more utility in getting to him. Timmy was also squeezed out just by how much I was getting to Harden and McCollum at the shooting guard on FanDuel. So I think out of all those guys, Richardson would probably be my favorite, but if I got to none of them, I wouldn't really be sweating it.
Yeah, it's Porzingis is definitely a core play for me. Like I have some of these other guys in my lineups, but not like major pieces. Like I have a few lineups with Richardson. I have a few lineups with Tim Hardaway, but these are guys who are not really priority plays for me. Somebody who I actually did get to a good amount though is Maxi Kleber on FanDuel, where he's at an extremely cheap price. And the other thing here is not only is Luke out, but Willie Cauley-Stein is also out. JJ Redick not ready to make his debut. Nicola Melli not ready to make his debut with Dallas. So there's a little bit of a void to fill in the front court. So Maxi Kleber, who I view, he's much different on FanDuel versus DraftKings just because he's so close to min priced on FanDuel. Was he somebody that you liked on FanDuel?
I would take what I get of him, but I think the negative leverage is scaring me off a little bit. And that's probably going to filter him out of a lot of my lineups when I run it through process. We're getting him well over double, like 1.5 times again on top with the ownership as compared to how much he's coming up optimal. So there are just other plays that I like at power forward, both at the top between Porzingis and Giannis, and then through some of the mid range. We mentioned Jeremy Grant earlier. I think PJ Washington's on the board. I think Covington could have an interesting game. It's going to be I hesitated there because I thought Norm Powell and what might happen in that Portland rotation now, but I think Covington's still relatively interesting. Just some other guys that I would want to get to. I do agree the price is nice, and for that reason he's on the board, but I think that's why he's on the board so much for the public. So strong value play there, but I wasn't really looking for a ton of value out of the power forward. I was kind of looking to squeeze the mid-range a little bit and then go to the top for the power forward spot today.
So with that in mind, and by the way, we do have I'll get back to the forwards in a second, but we got a starting lineup here for the Pistons. A lot of people were asking questions about Saben Lee earlier. So I'll read off the Pistons starting lineup. Saben Lee not starting for Detroit. We have, here it is. Rodney McGruder, Wayne Ellington, Sadiq Bey, Jeremy Grant, and Mason Plumlee. So that's a little surprising. Rodney Scooter McGruder starting at point guard for the Detroit Pistons. What a team we have here. Wow. Any interest in him? I don't even know what his price is. I did not think to look at him earlier in the day. He has had a couple of good games recently. McGruder is 3,200 on DraftKings. Actually, with him starting, I'm probably going to get to him a little bit. 3,200 on DK. Any movement for you with the 3,200 Rodney McGruder?
I would have to take a minute to add him to this list of minutes so that he even pops up on the page at this point. He was not relevant for me before. So assuming he'd be, super low priced, I assume he's min price or around it on FanDuel. I guess he could come into, some relevance in terms of, maybe like a 4 or 5% type guy that you can mix and match in for value. But point guard was a spot where I think there were better options on the board. And it kind of still falls into that why guess at Detroit when we can have spots that we're a little bit more confident in for similar type salaries? So I think I would kind of continue to look at it that way. It's just a shame these guys aren't playing Orlando. That would have been a hell of a game.
Yeah. So actually, here's one of the issues I'm having now that I'm looking at the rotation. Magruder's going to get minutes. Diallo's still going to get minutes. Saban Lee, I don't think it's totally squeezed out of the rotation. I still think he gets minutes. So it's hard to give Magruder more than like 26 minutes. And that makes him a marginal play at best, just because even in 26 minutes, then we're looking at, like 18 fantasy points for Rodney Magruder. And for min price, like, yeah, that would be an okay result, but this is an 11-game slate with a lot of value options. I'd actually rather still get to Anthony Simons at close to minimum salary on DraftKings. So, I'm going to be not all that interested in Rodney Magruder now that I'm looking at the options for the Pistons.
Yeah, and look, sometimes it's not the best way to make this decision, but like, sometimes we do get to a point with just like, do we really want to go down with the Rodney Magruder ship? Do we want to put all the money that we're betting tonight and then we're that we're skill gaming tonight in play? So it's just not the play for me. He doesn't jump out as that extreme value. If his median projection was coming up in the 20s somewhere, like 22, 24, and it looked like there was upside to like the 26, 28 range, even assuming again like mid price, then we're talking there's a little bit of value that you can squeeze there. But just comparatively to some of the other options on the slate, I just don't see it.
All right, we have an unexpected little bit of news here. It's not slate breaking or anything, but it could impact value a little bit. Daniel House is out tonight for the Rockets with Kevin Porter Jr. also out. Are there any value plays now that you want to get to from Houston? Mentioned before, Ben McLemore is starting. Sterling Brown is starting. Sterling Brown is at 4,800 on DraftKings. Ben McLemore at 3,300. Does that do anything for you? Are you going to make any sort of adjustments with Daniel House out?
It could potentially lead to, I'm just looking at where the minutes were. We already had Sterling Brown at 33, and I wasn't getting to a ton of them. I think he mixed and matched his way through some of these, but I assume they filtered out once I ran it into the sorting table. McLemore at 4,000s. If we bump him, he's at a 14-minute projection. If we bump him a little bit, I think he would kind of land in that spot where Sterling Brown already was, where I'm going to get to a little bit of him, and he might be in some lineups that get crunched out, but then sorted out of the process. If he was in more than 4 or 5 of the lineups that actually got entered, I'd be very surprised.
So I'm going to get to a small amount of exposure to Ben McLemore on DraftKings because he's only 3,300. FanDuel at his price point, I think that's a different play. I don't really like him at that price, especially because it's such a loaded position. But DK at such a cheap price, especially because we were lowering Simons a little bit. Like I said, I was lowering Mo Bamba with news that he isn't going to be starting. Ben McLemore now is somebody who I'm going to be getting in probably like 10% of my lineups or so as a value play, just because I think that we are a little bit hurting for value on DraftKings just with some of that news that came out. Do you think that's a reasonable stance?
For sure. And he's also got that guard and forward flexibility. So you can put him at like 5 different spots and move him around the board all you want. So yeah, I think he's got a lot more utility and a lot more upside on DK for a cheaper price.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing that I like about him is rostering him. This is going to allow me to get to a little bit more Giannis, a little bit more Harden. So to me, that's something else that is a nice situation for me because I wasn't liking that I wasn't getting to a higher clip of James Harden. And now this is going to allow me to do that just by putting in, like 10% or so of Ben McLemore in my lineup. So centers, we've hit on them a little bit as we've gone over it for the course of this slate, but who are the real priority players for you at center on this slate?
Sorry, I was just teeing up I was going to just ask you I was going to ask you real quick before we moved on the star caliber, how much of Harden and Giannis are you getting together in those lineups that you're crunching out?
Ooh, that is going to here. Let me see. I'll click on them individually on Fantasy Cruncher, and then I could see how many lineups I actually have with them together. So James Harden, who is in 35% of my lineups, it looks like Giannis is in about a fifth of those with Harden. So it looks like somewhere around 20% of my lineups have Harden and Giannis together, and those are just extreme stars and scrubs lineups. It was something that I felt that was harder to do before we had this news with McLemore. And now I don't know for sure, but I'm going to assume that Ben McLemore is in a lot of the lineups that have both Giannis and Harden in them, which, yeah, I mean, if they both go off, I guess I'm rooting for Ben McLemore too. But yeah, I mean, for the price point, 3,300 of McLemore, I think that's definitely favorable on DraftKings, and that's something that allowed me to do that. How are you winding up now on Giannis and Harden? Which one do you have more exposure to?
So I've got more Harden as well, and it looks like I'm around it, probably a little bit more than you were on FanDuel with the two of them together, but it's around a fit. It might be a quarter, doing the math out, but it's around the same level of getting to the two of them together. And we can kind of tie in the answer to your other question, because a pretty frequent center that I'm getting where those two land together is Robert Williams for 6,000 the Time Lord. I think he's extremely relevant on the FanDuel slate. I think he's relevant to the DK slate as well at 6,400. So he's one of the top centers on the board for me, getting a good amount of Christian Wood, who we've talked about a few times, one of two options for Houston, going to do most of the legwork tonight. And then it looks like a couple of the stars jumped a little bit up the board from Alex. So I'm curious to see where they come up in this latest crunch that I'm running. It looks like Jokic and Karl Anthony Towns took a little bit of a step up in terms of how frequently optimal we're getting them. So some of that extra money that we found through some of these emergent value plays looks like it's spread to the center position a little bit.
Yeah, Towns is one of my favorite center plays on DK. 9,900 price tag. I've been pretty bullish on Towns relative to the field basically since he came back from COVID. I don't think there's been any, there was a couple slates where he's chalk, but in general, over the last month and a half, there's been very, very few slates where people are regularly getting to Karl Anthony Towns. And it was something I brought up on the strategy show this morning with Josh. The usage rate for him is so high as of late. I know a lot of people are talking about Anthony Edwards, but the last 5 games for Karl Anthony Towns, 33% usage, 34, 24, 38, and 30. That's a really significant amount of shots that he's getting up. So to me, Karl Anthony Towns, definitely somebody who I think is going a little bit overlooked. And then really quick, I want to get to a super chat from Jordan. Top 2 centers on FanDuel, top 3 small forwards, and 1 power forward on FanDuel. That is a lot to address in a minute and a half. But let's say, Terry, who are your top, top center, small forward, and power forward on FanDuel? Which were the ones you got the most exposure to?
Top 2 centers, Robert Williams, Christian Wood. Power forwards were the 2 stars, the obvious ones, Giannis and Kristaps Porzingis. That was an easy one. The small forward is the messy one. So we'll get over there real quick. Oh boy. Let me see what I actually got. I was looking at Alex's board and it's just so like flat and even. So crunching on FanDuel, I got the top 2, James Ennis and Gordon Hayward, and Jimmy Butler right there now. Was not getting Jimmy earlier, and it looks like he squeezed his way to some value as well. If you want a value play from way down the salary spectrum, Justin Holiday was coming up a little bit for me at 3,900.
All right, so that is going to bring us to lock for the FanDuel and DraftKings slates. But the content does not end here, because Terry and I, for the next 30 minutes, we're going to be covering the SuperDraft slate. But don't go away, even if you don't play on SuperDraft, or if you're unsure about playing on SuperDraft, because for FanDuel and DraftKings, guys get rolled out at any point in time. And if that happens, Terry and I are certainly going to be going over some of the guys that we're going to be swapping to, and pretty good chance it happens with an 11-game slate. But guys, don't forget, for SuperDraft, SuperDraft Daily Fantasy is partnered with Caesars Reward to transform the DFS industry forever. The DFS industry was one way, and now it's a totally different way, according to the read in front of me. This has totally changed everything now that they've partnered with Caesars Reward. This is an opportunity to make serious cash even better for a DFS player with low rake, high stakes contests that are expected to have huge overlays on SuperDraft as it rapidly grows. As a bonus, you will earn Caesars rewards with every contest you enter. Tonight, SuperDraft is hosting a 20K jump shot with 4K to first. So make sure to get your entries for that. And we're going to have NBA SuperDraft projections. Those are up on the website. Also, if you're making your first deposit on SuperDraft, make sure you use the promo code Awesemo21 to get $50 free when you deposit $50 or more. You download the SuperDraft in the App Store or at superdraft.io today. SuperDraft, no limits, more winning. So for those of you who are not familiar with SuperDraft, we're not playing with the normal salary restrictions. It works on a multiplier. So as opposed to it being where you have some sort of restriction where it's like, hey, I don't know, I really like Luka. I really like, well, not Luka tonight. You don't want to play Luka tonight, but let's say you really like Giannis. You really like Jokic. You really like Karl Anthony Towns. You can't play them all together on DraftKings. Well, maybe you could, except there's an absurd opportunity cost. On SuperDraft, you could play all these guys, and it's just their fantasy points relative to a multiplier. So let's get into SuperDraft right now. Do you have the SuperDraft projections in front of you at the moment?
I do. And I love the way we lay this out with just like, here's Alex's projection. Here's what it is after you multiply it. You can really see it just stratifies everything perfectly for you. It makes it really, really easy. Kind of a no-brainer just firing up our projections and being able to put together pretty damn good lineups. So I really like this page.
All right. So with that in mind, let's go over some of the top plays here in Alex's projections. The number one overall play. And are you going off of Alex's numbers or your own?
I can flip back and forth to some degree, at least.
Okay. So
mine is like an update and a half behind. So I might have missed a couple things that changed, but we're good.
So the number one player, I think no real surprise in Alex's projections on SuperDraft, CJ McCollum, also a top play on both FanDuel and DraftKings. I assume that is about the same for you. Nothing real crazy there.
Nothing at all crazy about that one. I had him about a point and a half higher than Alex had him, so I like him even better.
By the way, hold up a sec. We do have a somewhat interesting starting lineup here. Toronto Raptors starting Kyle Lowry, Fred VanVleet, Gary Trent Jr., OG Anunoby, and Pascal Siakam. Gary Trent in the lineup for the Raptors. I don't even know if he was on this slate or not. It wasn't even something that crossed my mind. What do you make of this news with Gary Trent starting for Toronto?
That's interesting. 5,200 shooting guard on the FanDuel slate. So he's relevant over there probably. Although it looks like we did have him projected for some minutes, 28 minutes. If he pops to a little bit more than that, he could gain some more relevance. The shooting guard was that one of those positions where we had the 2 stars and then a bunch of mix and match options. So guy who shoots 40% from 3 can make himself pretty relevant pretty quickly in the starting lineup. That said, that Toronto lineup, we know they spread the ball around a decent amount. He's playing alongside 3 pretty heavy usage guys already in the trio that they've got there. So he's interesting. If he was if he was a little bit cheaper, in that like 4,800 range, 4,500 range, he might be even more relevant. 5,200, I think he'll get to, some degree, but would I go out of my way to try and swap to him or something? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not going to be getting to him now that I'm just looking over this. Number one, it's a pretty tough matchup going up against Phoenix. Something else that somebody posted in our Slack chat that I didn't think about is since Toronto was playing against since Toronto was playing in Tampa Bay this year, one of the reasons that the trade was able to work is since Portland was already in Orlando for the game against the Magic, there wasn't very much travel distance between Norman Powell and Gary Trent. That's why both those guys were able to be active. I didn't even think of that before, but that is the reason that both of them were able to play and didn't have to miss any time because of the trade. So Gary Trent, who I think is a decent pickup for the Raptors, really good 3-point shooter, shooting right around 40% for the year off the top of my head. But I still worry a little bit. His first game with the new team, also a tough matchup. How is he going to integrate into the offense? And it's not like he's min-priced or anything like absurdly cheap, given what his salary is. I'd rather give it a game just to see how he fits into the offense and what his role is before I swap to him. So I'm not going to be playing Gary Trent in any of my lineups.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Although just taking a look at the SuperDraft board real quick, now that since we're on it, 1.65 multiplier, suddenly surprisingly, more relevant guy. He's not like at the top of the board, but maybe you throw him into a lineup somewhere just to make him relevant and tie it back to the sponsor.
All right. Some of the other top plays on SuperDraft, according to Alex's projections, Michael Carter-Williams, who comes in with a 1.8x multiplier. Now, I know earlier you said, at least on DraftKings, you thought that Michael Carter-Williams was going a little bit over-owned. But now we look at SuperDraft, where it was a 1.8x multiplier. How does that change how you view Michael Carter-Williams with that kind of multiplier?
Yeah, it makes him one of the best plays on the board with a bullet. And this is where you really see, how the SuperDraft math works out. That puts him after the multiplication like a 1.5 more highly projected than Giannis. It puts him like 3 points more highly projected than Nikola Jokic, Karl Anthony Towns, and on down the list. He is the second highest projected player in raw points on the slate. So that's what these multipliers do. So that's why you've got to consider, what is the guy's multiplier? What's the role change that he's due for? So sometimes names like this, when they're thrust into specific roles, and Jalen Brunson, I'm sure we'll talk about in a sec, fourth guy on the list, 1.75 multiplier, I guess we'll talk about him now, is also very relevant because of that changed role. So look for spots like that where there's a big multiplier on a guy who's suddenly projected for like a 35-point night already. He picks up and that, essentially doubles his projection and vaults him above some of those superstar type guys. And yeah, people will be hearing about these guys around the industry, but they're playing them around the industry, right? They're playing them where their salary values, and maybe they're not thinking of them in the same terms on SuperDraft. So maybe you can get a little bit off the beaten path with them, where other people, the general public at large, likes to roster a lot of stars together one side by side on SuperDraft because they can. You can get to the sharp plays and play the guys that have those big multipliers like the MCWs, the Jalen Brunsons.
You know what's pretty interesting about the Orlando Portland game? Remember earlier people were saying like, oh, the blowout risk there, and that the Blazers are just gonna smash Orlando. So early in the day, this was also a little bit because of the Damian Lillard news and him getting ruled out. But I mean, we started the show. Portland was a double-digit favorite on the betting line over Orlando. It's only 9.5 points now. So 9.5 is not a number that I'm overly concerned about in terms of being a blowout. Obviously, blowout's always possible, but that's not like a super problematic number. I still think this game, if you play this game 10 times, I think it stays competitive probably like 8 out of 10. Like, I don't think blowout is the most likely outcome here. Does that change your view of this game at all, the way the spread has moved?
I think it's interesting. It's relevant to the slate, and it was relevant to how guys projected. I caught a little bit of the downturn in the game total coming into the show, so I had incorporated it into my overall projections for guys. So the game total coming down a little and the spread tightening up a little bit had an effect just kind of across the various projections, how many possessions I was projecting out for the game, and all those things. But in terms of a blowout, I never really like to take guys off, so I hadn't adjusted down for like the potential of a blowout. But I do like the fact, just if we're talking it through as the narrative, yeah, most of the time, all right, so it's a 6-point game. Like, we're not considering that a blowout. They're not taking CJ off the court in a 6-point game, a 9-point game. If it's out to 12, 15 points and midway through the fourth quarter, sure, we might see him sit. But now it's less and less likely that that's the game we're going to have. So it makes me like him better, but not like in a projection ways, because it was already taken care of.
All right. Now, as for these other guys on SuperDraft, I know I saw somebody bring up in the chat that they think that James Ennis is a better play than Michael Carter-Williams. 1.9x multiplier for Ennis on SuperDraft, 1.8x multiplier for Michael Carter-Williams. I think a whole bunch of these guys look like pretty good plays relative to their multipliers here. So who are the other guys that really stand out to you on SuperDraft relative to some of these really big multipliers? I don't think there's a single guy. Let me see this. So the of the players who are active for them, the lowest multiplier is 1.8x. Every other player in the rotation, 1.8x multiplier better, which is just ridiculous.
That is completely absurd. I doubt we've seen a team like that. Maybe, some of those OKC games earlier in the season, maybe we had something similar, but that's probably the highest team aggregate multiplier we've had. I think the Ennis call is interesting. I mentioned he jumps pretty significantly in his fantasy points per minute rate with all those guys taken out of the lineup, taken off the team. He was something like 1.18 fantasy points per minute. So when we math that out, based on where Alex had him projected, he was a little bit lower than Michael Carter-Williams. It was the comp point that the person brought up. He was projected like 5 points lower. So after you do the multiplying out, you get MCW as like 7 points higher in Alex's numbers. Mine are a little bit closer because I had James Ennis projected a little bit higher than Alex did, but it's still MCW by a nose.
Yeah, and by the way, just because I have to address this, Butthole Jenkins in the chat asking us, any thoughts on Taco Fall getting any run? Potentially, because the Celtics are so shorthanded, but don't play Taco Fall today. This is an 11-game slate, a whole bunch of guys. Taco Fall, even if he gets minutes, I highly doubt it's more than like 8 to 10 minutes. His probably best situation is there's garbage time, and Taco Fall, close the game. Whatever fans are at the game, all go crazy, all 100 of them, because Taco Fall entered the game. But no, Taco Fall, not somebody to roster.
Yeah, try and avoid the novelty players in general. Just, the ones who are out there as a kind of a spectacle and little else. Just in general, I think we don't need to roster those guys.
Yeah, and then a question here from Sparks2718. We could talk about this because it's relevant to the Magic, which we were talking about in the SuperDraft slate. He asked, how many minutes do we expect Mo Bamba to play? Mo Bamba, who, when we first started the show, I said he was one of my favorite plays on the slate. Ended up not being the case as we went on because we found out he wasn't starting. It was a situation where I said Mo Bamba is one of my favorite plays because I expect him to start at center for the Magic. And maybe 5 seconds after that, the Magic starting lineup came out and Mo Bamba was not starting at center. It was Kem Birch instead. So what I did with the minutes is I assume it's going to be a time split between Mo Bamba and Kem Birch. I gave 26 minutes to Birch and 22 to Bamba. That made both of them marginal plays that I got to a little bit in my player pool, but nothing that was like substantial. I think I ended up with both of them around like 10% or so off the top of my head. So just circling back on that, Mo Bamba as a super draft play at a 1.8x multiplier. What do you make of him on super draft?
So that definitely is interesting. I'm curious. It looks like in Alex's numbers that left him, he was at a 28 projection. I think he came down a little bit in our most recent, or at least for me, he did. So he's on the board just given that multiplier, given the fact that we expect him to be out there, and he can rack up points per minute pretty quickly. But given the cut in minutes from, I liked it better at 26. Let's just simplify. I liked it better when I thought he was going to play 26 minutes.
Same. I always like players that are good fantasy points per minute producers that expect to play more minutes than less minutes. So yeah.
Say that.
But for sure, looking at these Orlando guys, the priority play is Michael Carter-Williams. If I had to play one other guy in Orlando, it's James Ennis. Other guys, like I said, like I think Mo Bamba is certainly viable at the 1.8x multiplier on SuperDraft, but nobody else that I'm really dying to roster. Any of the other ancillary pieces you look at for Orlando and think they are stronger plays. Maybe Dwayne Bacon 1.85x multiplier. To me, I'd like him to be a little bit wider, especially when we consider, like, think of it this way. Michael Carter-Williams on DraftKings today was 6,600. He has a 1.8x multiplier. Dwayne Bacon, who has nearly the same multiplier as Michael Carter-Williams, he was over $1,000 cheaper on DraftKings. So with that in mind, somebody like Dwayne Bacon, would you be willing to roster him on SuperDraft?
That's a good way to help make that decision, and it's pretty sharp. I was looking at Bacon as you brought him up there, and he is at an interesting enough position just on the board by virtue of that 1.85 multiplier that I think if you're making a ton of lineups, then yeah, you could slot him in, but he wouldn't be one of my first choices. I don't love going to guys who are almost entirely scoring dependent. Just looking at his numbers over all situations for the season, an 11.6 rebounding share, 10.3% assists. Just not a guy who does a lot. Comparing him to MCW, you get 17.9% rebounding share and a 31.6% assist rate out of MCW. So he does things beyond just scoring the ball. I never like to get tied to guys who just only need their shot to go down to be able to really do anything for us. And I think that's kind of the case that we get, particularly when we compare those two.
All right. As expected, we got the news. Luka Doncic officially out. He was considered unlikely to play, doubtful, but little peace of mind to anybody who is not of the belief that the injury reporting in the NBA is totally accurate. Sometimes there is reasons to be skeptical of the NBA injury reporting, but little relief there that Kristaps Porzingis officially ruled out. We talked earlier, Kristaps Porzingis, a very important piece on FanDuel, important on DraftKings also, but FanDuel absolutely must play in cash games. Same one for Jalen Brunson, who has a 1.75x multiplier on SuperDraft. He was somebody who's a must play in cash games on both FanDuel and DraftKings. So looking at some of the multipliers for these guys on Dallas, who are the ones that stand out to you?
Yeah, so Brunson's right there. I mentioned him when we were talking about Carter-Williams before, right there at the top of the board. And another guy, hopefully one of those unexpected plays. He is, I'm sure, getting talked up at every site in the industry, given the Luka news, just like we've been talking about it since the start of the show. But the 1.75 multiplier is staring us in the face. We know that Jalen Brunson can produce in this situation in a fantasy points per minute perspective. At that multiplier, that's like getting him at no salary. So I think you just smash that spot. Kristaps is right there as well. Actually stands a little bit above Brunson after we multiply it out. So those two guys would have been probably my first two clicks in a cash lineup for both the DFS, the traditional DFS sites. And I think they'd be among my first few clicks on the SuperDraft slate. Love them both on this one.
All right. And then let's talk about, because our friend Ryan C in the chat here, he seems to be very amped up asking questions about who I assume is Trey Burke. He's calling him Burks, different player. Both, although Trey Burke and Alec Burks currently on the Knicks, Trey Burke formerly on the Knicks, was traded to Dallas as part of the Kristaps Porzingis trade. What do you make of him as a play? He's not somebody I rostered on any of the main sites today. I don't think he looks particularly appealing on SuperDraft. I would change that opinion if Trey Burke ends up starting. But for now, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think Alex had him playing minutes in the teens. I don't really see it much differently. So Trey Burke, is he somebody who you got to on the main sites? And is he somebody that you would consider on SuperDraft that I assume is a 2x multiplier? Let me see. Yeah, 2x multiplier for him.
If we got starter news, which I don't expect, I guess he'd be a little bit somewhat relevant. But yeah, we had him at like a 20-minute projection. I was getting him under his target score or hitting his target score less than 2% of the time. Just not somebody who was on the board at all for me, even at 3,500 on FanDuel. I don't expect that would change very dramatically because he also plays the same position over there that Jalen Brunson does. At a 2 multiplier, if we had starters minutes, like if they came out and said Trey Burke is playing 32 minutes tonight, regardless of what happens in this game, then yeah, I think he's a little bit relevant at a 2x multiplier. But that would be like the only situation I would want to get to him.
Yeah. So now I'm kind of confused because Ryan in the chat said that he is talking about Alec Burks, not Trey Burke, I think, but the Knicks don't play tonight, so I'm not. That hasn't brought any clarity to me on the question. I think, I mean, Trey Burke I certainly like more than Alec Burks, but and by the way, also here's something else that we should mention. Somebody said that it says out for Gary Trent on what I assume is the DraftKings app, but they are notoriously incorrect. The only thing that I would say is it is possible. If you go to DraftKings, it might be a thing because he was recently traded. If he's on the wrong team, he won't accrue any fantasy points for today. For me, it was irrelevant because I don't have Gary Trent Jr. in my player pool. So I would just check to see if they have a note about that. But he's definitely starting.
Yeah, starting and like we talked about, could potentially have a little bit of relevance. No, he's on the right team.
All right, so yeah, I don't think that's an issue, but. I still don't like Gary Trent for this slate either way, but yeah, he is starting and he's on the right team. Question from Corey Bomber here. Here's just a 2v2. Giannis Hero. Oh no, 3v. This is actually confusing because this is a 3v2.
Fill the whole lineup.
A 3v2. He's Giannis Hero and Hart or never mind. CJ Porzingis Ayton. CJ Porzingis Ayton to me. Those are all higher priority plays.
Yeah, right, CJ, just based on the CJ and Porzingis part of it, I don't really care what the third piece was.
Yeah, it was. It's for sure.
It was Ayton, right?
Yeah, it doesn't matter though. McCollum, and yeah. All right, let's see. Have we settled about the? Have we settled the discussion about Alec Burks and Trey Burke here? No. All right, whatever. It's still confusing. It doesn't matter. Don't play Trey Burke tonight. Don't play Alec Burks. Although Trey Burke if he starts, but for now I don't expect that to be the case. Some of the other guys who rate out really well on SuperDraft. Let's talk about the pay up options. Giannis Antetokounmpo 1.05x multiplier. Nikola Jokic 1.05x multiplier. Karl Anthony Towns 1.1x multiplier. So, I mean, not necessarily a pay-up option because that's not really how SuperDraft works, but just the guys who have the lower multipliers. Or any of these guys priority plays for you on SuperDraft?
Yeah, I think Giannis is interesting enough. Doesn't have to do a lot to hit a score that puts him even at just a 1.05 multiplier. Pretty much relevant and pretty much level with all those other plays that we've talked about from the top of the board. He's Giannis. So I don't think we have to really question his ability to put up a 61 fantasy point night, especially the way that SuperDraft has kind of an accelerated scoring system. So I really like him on this board, despite the multiplier. Jokic, I think, is right there as well. Maybe a little bit of a tick down. I think Giannis is able to make his own points happen a little bit more, although Jokic is a fantastic distributor of the ball and can definitely rack up points in a number of ways similarly to what Giannis does. I think Giannis has a little bit of an edge there that squeezes him out. Towns is right there, but similarly, as we start talking about centers, I knock them down a peg just for virtue of needing somebody to get them the ball in a lot of cases. So like Christian Wood is right there. A guy who's interesting on this one, 1.5x for Kyle Kuzma. He was a guy who was somewhat interesting on FanDuel, but priced strangely. Like I just didn't want to pay 7 and change for Kyle Kuzma. Never really do. Not a guy I trust. But on this slate at a 1.5, I think he's kind of interesting.
You know what about Kyle Kuzma is I've made fun of him for a long time. I've said that he's the West Coast version of Kevin Knox, and yeah, he's played like a little bit better this year when he's been out on the court. I think something that's helped Kyle Kuzma is he's playing within himself. Like I think for a long time there was this assumption, like even LeBron said it before last year. He said, if we're going to be a championship team, we need Kyle Kuzma to be our third best player. And that didn't actually have to be the case. They just needed him to not wreck Anthony Davis and LeBron James. What turned out is they needed LeBron James and Anthony Davis to be healthy, and everything else was just going to be peaches for them. But I think Kyle Kuzma playing within himself has really helped him so far this year. But now also on SuperDraft, I think him and Montrezl Harrell, 1.5x multiplier for Kuzma, 1.4x multiplier for Montrezl Harrell. Both of them are important plays when we consider all the guys who are out for the Lakers. So I know you brought up Kuzma there. How do you feel about Harrell at a 1.4x multiplier?
Yeah, pretty similar. I think that those are going to be probably their two featured guys. And Harrell leads the team when AD and LeBron are both out in usage. I think it was something like 28% of memory serves from the other day. So yeah, I think he's going to see a significant share of opportunities. He's right there with Kuzma, which is something that sounds like I'm taking him down, but I'm not. He's right there near the top of the board with Kyle Kuzma. Just for the record, I would drive Kevin Knox to the airport twice to bring Kyle Kuzma back, and I don't like Kyle Kuzma.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Knox, who is somehow still like one of the younger players on the Knicks, but he's like, no, I'll stick in the league. I'll like mentor players who are older than me or something. But yeah,
Obi Toppin needs him. Obi Toppin came in like 4 or 5 years older than Kevin Knox somehow, and needs him as a mentor, I guess.
Here's a question. We talked about Robert Williams a little bit before as a DraftKings play. We talked about as a FanDuel play. Now somebody in the YouTube chat is asking, what is the viability of Robert Williams as a SuperDraft play, 1.35x multiplier? We did recently get the Celtics starting lineup. It is confirmed that Robert Williams is starting as expected. 1.35x multiplier. How do you feel about Robert Williams? For me, I like him. I have a little bit of a bias pro Robert Williams because I've talked about my best ball exposure towards him. I have a handful of centers I'm really exposed to in DraftKings SuperDraft. It is Robert Williams, Jakob Poeltl, Jusuf Nurkic. So I think that goes two ways. Number one, maybe I have a little bit of a bias towards Robert Williams, but it also means I like Robert Williams a lot. So he's somebody, when he's actually out on the court for Boston, he's crushed this year. And now that Daniel Tice is off the team, he has one less guy to compete for minutes. I don't think Robert Williams is a guy who's going to play like 32 to 34 minutes, but just no Daniel Tice there is going to have to be more minutes for Robert Williams. 1.35 multiplier. Give me some Robert Williams.
Yeah, fantasy point per minute monster, and a guy who, like you said, should have a more established role. They've talked about wanting him to have that role and kind of take over now. So yeah, I think he's very relevant on the board. The one thing I would say is just given the number of forward and center guys that we do have above him and mixed in kind of around his tier, it might take away from mashing him in as one of your primary plays. But at the same time, a lot of people might be going to some of those other guys, and you might get sneaky with Robert Williams. So consider him from that regard as you're building out a bunch of lineups, but he's right there on the board for sure.
All right, JJ Redick, as expected, officially out for the Dallas Mavericks. So just one less guy to compete with for minutes. If you're interested in the Tim Hardaway Jr.'s, Josh Richardson's of the world, that is one less guy to take up minutes there. Let's see. We have some questions in here about, there was somebody I just wanted to talk about. Oh, it was from the Rockets. Somebody asked about John Wall and his viability as a play on SuperDraft. John Wall, who is at a 1.15x multiplier. So I liked John Wall a lot on FanDuel and DraftKings, but 1.15x multiplier, like keep in mind that Karl Anthony Towns is a 1.1x multiplier. 1.15x, I like John Wall is going to take all the shots in the world, but I can't roster him when there's somebody in the same multiplier range like Karl Anthony Towns, who I think is a far better fantasy producer. So John Wall at the 1.15x multiplier. I assume you're going to be on the same boat as me, but I'll ask the question a different way. What do you think is a fair multiplier for John Wall?
If I had another point, if I had another like 10th of a point on there, like 1.25, I think we could start seeing him bounce a little bit more. At least, up this board, it would take him probably halfway from where he is now up toward the top of the board. I think that would make him more relevant. He doesn't need a lot more, but he definitely needed a little bit more juice than that 1.15. Two guys at the guard spot that I think are more relevant and are projecting out better. And based on just tying back to that JJ Redick news, Josh Richardson, and Tim Hardaway Jr. 1.70 for Richardson, 1.75 for Timmy. I like both of those guys better on this site than I do on the salary site. I think that's a better multiplier than where we were getting them salary wise. That would be akin to getting them, in that 4,000 or a little bit less type of a salary range on FanDuel. So I like that multiplier for those guys.
A little bit of an unexpected starting lineup here for the Minnesota Timberwolves. They are starting Jaden McDaniels at small forward. So it's Rubio, Edwards, McDaniels, Vanderbilt, and Towns. McDaniels, any interest in him as a potential pivot option as a value play? Just 4 minutes to go until we wrap up here.
0.73 fantasy point per minute guy, only 3,600 over on FanDuel, 43 at small forward and power forward on DK. Probably priced up a little too high on DK. Maybe he slots into, like, if you wanted to mix out a couple value spots at the power forward. I just don't know that we needed that on FanDuel. So I don't know that he gains anything for us. If you've got specific changes that, like, all of a sudden putting Jaden McDaniels in there helps you make with 3,600, like, don't build him in replacing like a mid-range player with another scrub. But if he helps you swapping down from another scrub to him and just changing salary a little bit helps you get to a better star, then yeah, maybe he's got some utility.
All right, guys, just a couple minutes left to go, but don't forget, if you go to SuperDraft, SuperDraft, download SuperDraft in whatever app store, Google Play Store, whatever user, or go to superdraft.io and you can play on SuperDraft. Like we're talking about, little different structure here. Instead of building with salary restrictions, we're playing with a multiplier. SuperDraft does have a 20K jump shot tonight. That is with 4K going to first place. There's a chance there's a little bit of overlay there. I don't have access to SuperDraft where I live, so I'm not totally sure what the contest is at in terms of spots remaining. Other thing also, though, is if you want to make your first deposit, use the promo code Awesemo21 to get a $50 free when you deposit at least $50. So promo code Awesemo21. Let's see, a few minutes left. Is there any player that stands out to you on SuperDraft that we are yet to talk about? We've talked about most of the players that have the best projections from Alex's projections. The top five was CJ McCollum, Michael Carter-Williams, Kristaps Porzingis, Jalen Brunson, and Giannis Antetokounmpo. Is there anybody off the board who you think is maybe going overlooked? Obviously, we don't have ownership projections, but maybe somebody who just the industry wasn't on in general that could lead to them being an interesting super draft play that other people won't be on.
I think PJ Washington at a 1.6 is kind of interesting. He's not like super sneaky down Alex's board there, but he's somebody that we didn't talk about. I don't think the industry is really talking about them like at all today. So I think that number is somewhat interesting for what we could see from PJ today in not the greatest matchup in the world by any means going up against Miami, but a guy who can produce 0.98 fantasy point per minute guy. If he gets any of the center minutes, he's a little bit more productive when he's in that spot. Don't know that we expect that tonight by any means, but just a guy who's out there a significant amount of the time for them and has been producing. I don't know that a ton of people are going to it. So I think that would be kind of sneaky and an easy way to pick up a fairly big multiplier on a good player.
All right. We are almost wrapped with the show, guys. Don't forget, if you have not done so already, do us a favor, hit the like button. Also, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Like I said, whether James Harden is ruled in or out early on any given slate solely depends on whether you subscribe to our YouTube channel or not. So go ahead and do that. I know the Brooklyn Nets check that every morning to see if they should rule out James Harden, mark him questionable, make him a game time decision. It all depends on whether you subscribe to our YouTube channel or not. Terry, let's go. Final thoughts on the slate. Who is most likely to make or break you tonight?
Oh, God. It's probably CJ McCollum, I would guess. But there are several answers to that question. It could be easily Jalen Brunson, Kristaps Porzingis right there. I'm on some of those super chalky plays, just given the total value that they've got. So I'm going to need to find my path through that because if they hit, a lot of people are going to be there with me. So I'm going to have to hope some of the other guys that I rostered, like I went to Jarrett Allen, like I mentioned, and some of the center shares, a little bit offbeat. So I've got a bunch of different ways to get there. But I'm riding the chalk. So if the chalk breaks, I am dead in the water.
Yeah, I'm seeing people complain about James Harden, but we're 7 minutes into the game. He's 5 points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists. Whatever. It's not a big deal. That's fine. Nothing real of note there. But guys, that is going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for watching. There is an NBA late slate live before lock. So stick around for that. That is going to be coming up, I think, at 9:30 p.m. Eastern time. So also all the more reason to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Hit the notification bell so you know when that show will go live. Tyler, play us out and everybody have a good weekend.